The golden hour is fading, and the heavy iron-wrought lantern at the gatehouse flickers to life, casting a warm amber glow against ancient weathered stone. The air here is entirely still, carrying only the faint scent of pine needles, wood smoke from a distant hearth, and the aroma of damp earth settling quietly into the evening. You're standing in the silent courtyard of an ancient sanctuary, a place where time has slowed to the gentle, unhurried rhythm of a resting heartbeat. High above you, the imposing silhouette of a stone tower reaches toward a sky that is slowly being painted in deepening shades of indigo and violet. The world outside these thick walls is vast and fast-moving, but inside this sheltered space there is only the quiet permanence of the stones. They have stood here for countless centuries, bathed in the silver light of 1,000 moons, warmed by the rising sun, and washed clean by the soft rhythmic rains of passing seasons. They hold the silence incredibly well. As we begin to wander through these quiet corridors, exploring the hidden corners, the grand echoing halls, and the secret sunlit chambers of these magnificent structures, there is absolutely nothing you need to hold on to. You do not need to try to remember the details or the mechanics of this world. You're simply a passing observer, a welcomed guest floating effortlessly through the centuries. Let your mind soften, just like wax warming gently near a crackling hearth fire. Let these ideas, these quiet fragments of history, drift through your awareness like autumn leaves moving on a slow, meandering stream. What stays with you, stays. What fades away is perfectly fine to release into the night. Your only task tonight is to listen to the soft echo of the stone, to feel the profound comfort of these ancient walls, and to let yourself be carried backward into a world of quiet strength, deliberate artistry, and enduring beauty. You're completely safe here, sheltered by the weight of history and securely anchored in absolute peace. If you were to walk over and place your open palm against the inner wall of the Great Hall as the evening deepens, you would find the rough-hewn stone surprisingly warm to the touch. This is not magic, but the quiet, unseen genius of architectural thermal mass. The walls of a castle were built with extraordinary deliberate thickness, sometimes reaching 10 or even 15 feet of solid, dense masonry. Throughout the long, bright hours of the day, these immense stone barriers would quietly absorb the heat of the sun, drinking in the golden light minute by minute. Then, as night falls and the cool, damp air descends upon the landscape, the stones slowly, gently radiate that captured invisible warmth back into the living spaces. It is a slow, rhythmic breathing of temperature, an ancient, harmonious exchange of energy between the earth, the sun, and the building. The castle itself acts as a giant protective battery of warmth, ensuring that the people resting inside are wrapped in a steady, comforting climate, shielded entirely from the sudden, sharp chills of the outside world. Moving deeper into the heart of the fortress, guided only by the soft glow of a carried lantern, you might find yourself at the base of a narrow spiral staircase, winding its way gracefully upward into the velvety shadows. Almost universally across the continent, these elegant stone spirals curl in a clockwise direction as they ascend. While originally conceived as a careful, pragmatic defense strategy, allowing a defender descending the stairs the free use of their right arm while restricting the movements of anyone climbing up, the unintended result is a structure of profound, hypnotic geometric beauty. The continuous spiral perfectly mimics the golden ratio so frequently found in the natural world, echoing the gentle, curling form of a nautilus shell, the swirl of a galaxy, or the unfurling of a new fern frond in the spring. As you climb, feeling the dip in the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of soft, leather-clad footsteps, the clockwise motion naturally turns your body, guiding you upward in a rhythmic, sweeping, completely fluid arc. It is a continuous motion captured in solid rock, a quiet dance between the rigid permanence of the castle and the graceful, sweeping curves of nature itself. Stepping over to a narrow slit window and looking outside, Down toward the base of the towering walls lies the quiet, glass-like surface of the surrounding moat. Often imagined merely as a trench of deep water designed solely to keep the chaotic world at bay, a moat was frequently a carefully cultivated ecosystem of immense tranquility and life. In the still hours of the early morning before the wind begins to stir the reeds, the flat water acts as a perfect dark mirror. It flawlessly reflects the towering stone battlements, the soft bruised clouds of dawn, and the changing painted colours of the morning sky, effectively doubling the majesty of the castle in a serene, upside-down world. These deep waters were carefully stocked with gliding fish, and quickly became protected havens for graceful swans, herons and wild ducks, their soft ripples breaking the mirror only momentarily before the water smoothed out again. The presence of this vast unbroken body of still water wrapped the castle in a profound visual and acoustic buffer, swallowing the harsh, distant sounds of the surrounding landscape and replacing them with the gentle, rhythmic, deeply soothing lapping of water against ancient stone foundations. Returning to the interior, pushing open a heavy oak door and stepping into a grand private bedchamber, the first thing your senses might register is the sudden, profound softening of the acoustics. The sharp, echoing clatter of boots on flagstone is instantly muffled, absorbed almost completely by the heavy, richly woven tapestries that drape the walls from the soaring ceiling down to the floor. These massive, intricate textiles, painstakingly woven by hand over thousands of hours, with threads of thick wool, delicate silk and spun gold, were much more than mere aristocratic decoration. They were the brilliant, soft insulation of the medieval world. By leaving a small, deliberate gap of air between the freezing cold stone wall and the thick fabric, the tapestries trapped ambient warmth inside the room, transforming a cavernous, draughty space into a deeply intimate, exceptionally warm cocoon. Visually, they transformed the stark grey walls into vibrant, silent forests and perpetually blooming spring gardens. They brought the idealised beauty of the outdoors inside, rendering the room perfectly silent and deeply warm. High above the noise, smoke and endless activity of the lower courtyards, tucked away safely in the very upper reaches of the central keep, was a beautiful room explicitly dedicated to the pursuit of pure light. This tranquil space was universally known as the Solar. It was the private, sun-drenched, ultimate sanctuary of the castle's inhabitants. Master architects designed the Solar with the largest, widest and most beautifully crafted mullioned windows the structural integrity of the heavy stone could safely support, specifically and carefully orienting them toward the south and the west to catch the long, golden, warming rays of the afternoon sun. It was a secluded space designed entirely for quiet, solitary reflection, for reading brightly illuminated manuscripts, for fine, detailed embroidery, or simply for sitting perfectly still and basking in the radiant warmth. In a world that was often illuminated only by the dim, flickering, unreliable glow of beeswax candles and smoky hearths, the Solar was a brilliant, airy, magnificent haven. It serves as a beautiful, lasting reminder that even in an age defined by heavy fortification, thick walls, and the need for defence, human beings deliberately and carefully carved out sacred spaces purely to welcome the light. As you slowly walk through the smaller, more intimate wood-panelled corridors leading away from the bright Solar, you might notice a subtle, incredibly sweet fragrance rising softly from the floorboards beneath your feet, to keep the stagnant air inside the castle pleasantly fresh, sweet, and clean. The wooden floors of the living quarters were frequently strewn with a carefully selected, hand-gathered mixture of dried river rushes and fragrant aromatic herbs. Vast quantities of plants like lavender, meadowsweet, chamomile, thyme, and lemon balm were thickly scattered across the stone and wood. With every single footstep you take, the gentle, rolling pressure of your weight would crush the dried leaves and stems just enough to release their essential oils directly into the still air. It was a brilliant, highly effective, an entirely passive form of continuous aromatherapy. The entire castle breathed with the complex, calming scent of the surrounding summer meadows. The specific use of meadowsweet, in particular, offered a rich scent highly reminiscent of warm almonds and newly cut hay, creating an enveloping atmosphere that was inherently grounding and deeply relaxing, miraculously turning a simple, quiet walk down a darkened hallway into a sensory experience that instantly calmed the nervous system. When you pause to look closely at the rough masonry of the outer curtain walls, noticing the beautiful, subtle variations in the colour of the individual blocks, the soft, creamy whites, the pale, dove greys, the warm, rusty iron hues, and the touches of mossy green, you're actually looking directly at the exposed geology of the surrounding landscape. Because transporting unimaginably heavy materials over long, treacherous medieval roads was incredibly difficult and costly, castles were almost entirely constructed from the deep bedrock upon which they actually stood, or from quarries located just a few short miles away. This incredible fact means a castle was never an alien, artificial object abruptly dropped onto the land, but rather an organic, literal extension of the earth itself. It was the very ground you walk on, deliberately lifted up, carefully shaped by human hands, and stacked artfully toward the sky. A castle in a chalky limestone region would naturally glow with a soft, pale, almost ethereal luminance in the bright moonlight, while a fortress built in a rugged volcanic region might be constructed of dark, brooding, glittering basalt. The soaring building and the deep earth were perfectly unified, sharing the exact same mineral composition, bound together forever in perfect natural harmony. In certain quiet corners of the castle's sprawling architecture, you might look up to see beautiful, ornate, projecting structures gracefully known as oriel windows. Rather than sitting flat and flush against the immense stone wall, these delicate, incredibly intricate stone and glass alcoves push bravely outward, appearing to be miraculously suspended in thin air, supported from below only by carved stone brackets known as corbels. Stepping into the small space of an oriel window feels remarkably like stepping out of the heavy constraints of the building and floating just slightly above the world. Because they project outward past the wall line, they ingeniously catch the wandering sunlight from multiple varying angles, allowing the warm light to pour in from the front and both sides simultaneously. They were originally designed as intimate, solitary viewing platforms, a small, quiet place where one could sit comfortably on a velvet-lined window seat, completely surrounded by the warmth of the sun, and simply watch the slow, inevitable transition of the seasons or the glorious fading of the sunset. Wandering back toward the lush-walled garden as the light softens, your ears might suddenly pick up a soft, highly rhythmic murmuring sound, a gentle, pulsing vibration that seems to live in the air itself. This is the uniquely comforting sound of the castle's dedicated dovecote. Many large, self-sustaining castles maintained beautifully designed, freestanding towers specifically to house hundreds of white doves and homing pigeons. Inside these tall, circular stone structures were hundreds of small, perfectly uniform nesting boxes, creating a striking, repeating pattern of intricate light and deep shadow across the curving inner walls. The continuous presence of the dovecote meant that the immediate atmosphere of the courtyard was constantly filled with the low, incredibly soothing sound of doves softly cooing to one another. It is an acoustic frequency that naturally and effortlessly lulls the human mind, a constant, deeply peaceful background murmur that gently softens the sharp edges of the day. In the still hours of the early morning, the beautiful sight of a flock of pure white doves catching the first pink rays of dawn was a profound daily symbol of peace. As the deep night finally settles and you seek a final place of rest within the thick castle walls, you might find yourself wandering into the private chapel or the upper vaulted reaches of the grand hall. Looking directly up, instead of seeing heavy wooden beams or shadowed stone, you are greeted by a breathtaking illusion. The gracefully curved ceiling has been meticulously painted a rich lapis lazuli blue, a permanent colour ground from precious stones to perfectly mimic the clearest, most infinite midnight sky. Scattered across this vast expanse of deep blue, master artists painstakingly applied hundreds of delicate stars in pure, glittering gold leaf. In the gently shifting light of a single flickering candle, the precious gold catches the flame, making the painted sky seem to twinkle and softly shimmer above you. The architects conspired to bring the majesty of the heavens directly indoors. It was a comforting way to sleep under the vastness of the stars while remaining perfectly warm and completely sheltered, providing a permanent, unchanging night sky that offered quiet comfort and infinite peace, no matter what storms might rage outside. As that single, perfect candle softly burns beneath the painted heavens of the ceiling, it reveals a subtle, unseen luxury of the medieval night. In the deepest, most private chambers of the castle, the air was never clouded by the harsh, acrid smoke of common tallow. Instead, the highest rooms were bathed exclusively in the pure, golden, steady light of pure beeswax. Vast, dedicated apiaries were maintained on the sunlit edges of the castle estates, where thousands of bees spent the long summer days distilling the essence of wildflowers into precious wax. When crafted into tall, elegant tapers, this wax burned with a slow, meticulous grace. It did not sputter or aggressively smoke, but held a perfectly still, tear-shaped flame that cast long, unwavering shadows against the tapestries. More remarkably, as the candle slowly melted, it released a subtle, pervasive fragrance into the stone room, a warm, profoundly comforting scent of late summer honey, sun-baked earth, and sweet meadow blooms. It gently purified the atmosphere, turning the simple act of illumination into a deeply calming sensory experience that allowed the eyes to rest and the mind to settle into a state of quiet grace. Drifting from that soft, honey-scented halo of light toward the tall, arched windows, you might notice how the moonlight outside does not simply pass through the glass, but actually bends, dances, and pools within it. This is the mesmerizing liquid effect of crown glass. Before the invention of perfectly flat, uniform industrial panes, castle glass was created entirely by human breath, rhythm, and motion. Master glaziers would blow a glowing globe of molten glass and then spin it rapidly on a long iron rod until centrifugal force flared it out into a wide, delicate spinning disc. This remarkable creation left the glass with subtle concentric ripples, delicate striations, and a distinctive, slightly thicker centre known as a bullseye. These individual pieces were then carefully cut into small diamond shapes and bound together by ribbons of soft, dark lead. Looking through these ancient leaded panes is exactly like looking through a slow-moving river. The landscape outside, the dark, jagged silhouette of a distant forest, the silver sweeping line of the moat, is gently softened and beautifully distorted. It turns the harsh, sharp reality of the outside world into a liquid, impressionistic painting, wrapping the room in a permanent visual softness. And as you stand quietly looking through that rippled ancient glass, breathing in the faint, sweet scent of the room, your body can just sink a little deeper into comfort. There is no rush here. The mind can simply drift from the glass to the heavy, dark wood framing the entrance to the chamber. Castle doors were never merely physical barriers, they were monumental works of deeply rooted earth and iron. Crafted from massive oak trees that had already stood in the surrounding forest for hundreds of years before ever being felled, the timber was then seasoned slowly in the open air for decades. It became so densely packed, so unbelievably hard and heavy, that it felt much more like solid stone than wood. To hold these massive, unyielding planks together, blacksmiths forged thick, beautiful iron bands and heavy, faceted studs, pounding them deep into the wood while the metal was still glowing cherry red from the forge. When a door of this immense weight and thickness is slowly pushed shut on its massive iron hinges, the deep, resonating, low-frequency thud it makes is a sound that speaks directly to the deepest parts of the human nervous system. It is the ultimate, undeniable acoustic signature of absolute safety. A heavy, final boundary that leaves all external worries firmly locked on the outside. Safely secured behind those ancient iron-studded doors, you might find a smaller, deeply fragrant side room hidden in the thickness of the wall. In modern times, a wardrobe is merely a simple piece of wooden furniture, but in the sprawling, complex architecture of a medieval fortress, the wardrobe, or the garde-robe de robe, was a dedicated, highly secure, deeply aromatic room designed specifically to protect the most valuable textiles in the world. Because fine silk, crushed velvet, ermine, and densely woven wool were often as precious as gold or jewels, this room was a heavily guarded treasury of woven art. To protect these materials from the creeping dampness of the stone and the threat of moths, the wardrobe was constantly infused with vast quantities of rare, imported spices and beautifully dried botanicals. Great heavy wooden chests were lined entirely with intensely fragrant cedar wood, while hundreds of small, tightly bound linen pouches filled with crushed cloves, dried lavender, rosemary and sweet woodruff were carefully tucked between the heavy, dark folds of winter cloaks and tapestries. Stepping into this enclosed room was like stepping into a dense, incredibly rich cloud of protective aromatics. It serves as a beautiful reminder that in this era, preservation was an act of profound, deliberate care, wrapping the things they valued most in thick layers of beautiful, calming scent. This profound, methodical care for preservation extended far beyond the warm walls of the keep, reaching deep into the cool, silent earth itself. If you were to wander out of the warm interior, drifting down into the cool, moonlit shadows of the lower estate, you might discover a curious, softly sloping grass mound concealing a subterranean marvel, the castle ice house. Long before the constant mechanical hum of modern refrigeration, ancient architects engineered a state of perfect, silent, natural cold by digging vast, brick-lined, egg-shaped chambers deep into the naturally insulated soil. During the most freezing, silent weeks of deep winter, workers would cut massive, glittering, translucent blocks of pure ice from frozen, still lakes. They would carefully haul them to the chamber, layering them heavily with insulating golden straw or thick sawdust, and pack them tightly into these deep brick wells. The sheer, overwhelming thermal mass of the surrounding earth, combined with the brilliant descending shape of the chamber, trapped the heavy freezing air so effectively that the ice remained completely solid through the entire turning of the spring and summer seasons. Even in the sweltering, golden, oppressive heat of late August, the castle inhabitants could descend a few stone steps into the dark, damp earth and retrieve a piece of preserved winter, a pure, crystalline luxury maintained entirely by the quiet, motionless genius of natural insulation. Let the image of that dark, cool, perfect stillness wash over you for a moment. There is a deep, profound peace in knowing how carefully, how perfectly, the earth can hold on to things. Your breath can settle into that same steady, reliable rhythm, requiring no effort at all, knowing that you are completely anchored. As you imagine walking slowly back up from the cool, earthy depths of the ice house, trailing your fingertips lightly against the rough, curving stone walls of a tunnel, you might feel a sudden, deliberate indentation in the rock. If you were to bring a lantern close, casting a warm, raking, sideways light across the block, a small, highly geometric symbol would suddenly leap from the shadows. A perfectly carved, sharp triangle, a delicate interlacing of sweeping lines, or a deeply grooved crossed arrow. These are the ancient mason's marks. In the monumental, often decades-long endeavour of building a towering castle, hundreds of entirely anonymous stonemasons shaped millions of individual blocks with nothing but a heavy wooden mallet and an iron chisel. To ensure they were rightfully paid for their specific labour, Each master carver possessed their own unique, deeply personal signature, strictly registered with the secretive Masons Guild. They struck these beautiful marks directly into the centre of the stones they finished. Today, these massive, imposing walls are secretly covered in a quiet, hidden, intricate alphabet. It is a profoundly moving, deeply human realization that behind the overwhelming, massive, intimidating scale of a fortress, there is the incredibly fine, intimate touch of an individual human hand. A quiet voice from centuries ago softly and permanently whispering into the rock, "I was here, and I made this perfectly." Moving outward from those quiet stone corridors and stepping into the gentle, moving night air, the heavy, imposing architecture eventually gives way to a radically different kind of sanctuary. Tucked securely within the formidable, towering outer curtain walls, deeply shielded from the fierce, biting winds and the wildness of the untamed forest beyond, lay the Hortus Conclusus, the deeply treasured enclosed garden. This was not a sprawling space for grand utilitarian agriculture, but a meticulously cultivated, highly intimate paradise designed entirely for the gentle soothing of the human senses. Here, the chaotic, sprawling, unpredictable geometry of nature was coaxed into perfect, harmonious, restful order. Raised beds of rich, dark, fragrant earth were neatly bordered by beautifully woven willow branches, overflowing with intensely scented damask roses, tall, swaying spikes of blue delphinium, and deep green creeping thyme. Along the edges of the garden were specially constructed turf seats, low benches built of earth and entirely planted with low-growing, incredibly soft chamomile, which would release an aroma of warm apples whenever someone sat upon them. At the very centre of this geometric paradise, there was almost always a small, quietly bubbling stone fountain, providing a constant melodic trickle of moving water that perfectly and naturally masked any distant, harsh sounds of the outside world. The enclosed garden was the ultimate safe haven tucked within a safe haven, a living, breathing architecture of perfume and soft petals, proving that even the most hardened inhabitants of the medieval world possessed a deep, fundamental human need to sit quietly, safely, and peacefully among the flowers. To slowly leave the soft sanctuary of the garden and approach the massive main gatehouse is to experience a striking, breathtaking contrast in texture and scale. Hanging suspended in the massive echoing stone archway of the main entrance is the portcullis, a formidable, incredibly heavy sliding grid of hardened oak timbers heavily shod with iron spikes. While its ultimate purpose was deeply serious and defensive, the visual effect it creates when the afternoon sun or the bright full moon shines directly through it is completely hypnotic. The heavy intersecting beams cast a perfect, mathematically precise grid of deep, dark shadow and bright illuminated squares across the heavily worn, uneven cobblestones of the entrance tunnel. As the light source slowly, imperceptibly moves across the sky over the long course of hours, this sharp, geometric net of light and dark stretches, gracefully warps and slowly crawls across the stone floor like a giant, silent, moving sundial. Walking through this alternating pattern of bright light and deep shadow feels remarkably like passing through a magical sieve, a psychological threshold that gently filters out all the noise and chaos of a long journey, preparing the mind and body to enter a place of complete, highly structured stillness. You do not need to hold on to these images tightly. Just let them pass like the slow-moving shadows on the cool stone. Your body grows a little heavier, a little softer with each breath, settling deeper into the mattress just as the heavy castle perfectly settles into the deep bedrock. Everything is fully supported. Deep beneath that very bedrock, far below the worn cobblestones, the vaulted cellars, and the lowest foundations lies the true, silent, life-giving heart of any great fortress, the great castle well. A castle could successfully withstand any external pressure, any fierce weather, and any passage of time, but only if it possessed a secure, unbroken connection to the deep, hidden waters of the earth. Sinking a well shaft straight down through solid, unforgiving rock was an astonishing feat of human patience, sometimes taking years of blind, millimetre-by-millimetre excavation in absolute total darkness to reach the pure, flowing aquifers hidden hundreds of feet below the surface. When the heavy pickaxe finally broke through the final layer of stone to reach the water table, it tapped into an ancient, subterranean, silent ocean that had been naturally filtered through miles of porous limestone and deep sand for thousands of years. The water drawn up from these extreme, terrifying depths in a heavy, dripping oak bucket was impossibly cold, astonishingly clear, and completely untouched by the light of day. Dropping a small, smooth pebble down one of these shafts and waiting for the distant, echoing musical plink is a breathtaking exercise in realizing the sheer, vertical vastness of the world hidden directly beneath our resting feet. And as the ripples from that single drop of water slowly fade in the dark earth below, the rhythm of life high above continues its slow, beautifully unhurried pace. In the era of these great, silent stone sanctuaries, time was not frantically divided into the precise, stressful, rapidly ticking minutes and seconds of the modern world. Time was a slow, majestic, organic wheel, guided smoothly by the slow arc of the sun, the changing phases of the moon, and the subtle shifting of the light. The only structured, formal marker of the passing hours during the long, dark night was the deep, resonant, beautifully mournful sound of the night watchman's horn. Positioned on the very highest windswept tower, wrapped securely in heavy wool against the nighttime chill, the solitary watchman would scan the silver-lit horizon and periodically sound a single, long, drawn-out, mellow note out into the vast darkness. This sound was never meant as an alarm, but rather as a profound musical reassurance. It drifted slowly down through the crisp night air, sliding smoothly through the narrow arrow slits, and wrapping around the sleeping inhabitants like a heavy protective blanket. It was a gentle, recurring lullaby falling from the sky, a musical promise that someone was awake, someone was watching, and all was perfectly safely well. As the final low echo of that distant horn fades completely into the vast protective canopy of the night sky, leaving only the profound, settling quiet of the ancient stone, the mind is entirely free to wander deeper still. We can drift further into the forgotten velvet-lined corners of this ancient world, where the quietest secrets of the dawn are only just beginning to stir, long before the sun has fully crested the horizon. In our modern imaginations, gently nurtured by centuries of slow decay and romantic paintings, we invariably picture these massive stone fortresses as existing only in deep, brooding shades of charcoal and weathered grey. But when you step back into the vibrant living reality of their prime, a startling and magnificent truth reveals itself. The vast majority of these great castles were entirely coated from base to battlement in a thick, brilliant layer of protective lime wash. This ancient, carefully prepared mixture of crushed burned limestone and water was meticulously painted over every rough-hewn block, transforming the entire imposing structure into a gleaming, perfectly uniform monument of pure white. Against the rolling, deep emerald greens of the surrounding landscape and the soft, bruised purples of a rain-washed dawn sky, a freshly lime-washed castle did not merely blend into the earth, it radiated like a colossal, glowing pearl. This brilliant coating not only sealed the porous stone against the harsh winter dampness, but it fundamentally changed the psychological weight of the building. It shifted the architecture from feeling heavy and oppressive to something astonishingly weightless, creating an ethereal, shining palace that caught the very first pale rays of morning and held the fading light long after the valleys had surrendered completely to the dusk. That same soft, returning dawn light often reveals the delicate silver streaks of morning dew clinging to the vast expanses of the castle's highest lead-lined roofs. High above the sleeping courtyards, these expansive, gently sloping surfaces were engineered with a quiet, brilliant purpose that went far beyond simply keeping the weather out. They were massive, carefully calculated catchments for the sky. As the gentle, rhythmic spring rains fell, the water did not simply cascade over the sides in chaotic, muddy waterfalls. Instead, it was meticulously gathered by intricately carved stone channels and guided into a hidden, silent circulatory system of smooth terracotta and lead pipes built directly inside the thick masonry walls. This pure, soft rainwater travelled downwards in a soothing hidden murmur, eventually collecting in vast subterranean limestone cisterns buried deep beneath the courtyards. The porous limestone naturally filtered and sweetened the water, maintaining it at a perfect, icy temperature year-round. It is a profoundly calming realization that the entire immense structure of the castle functioned as a living, drinking organism, quietly capturing the weather itself and storing the sky's nourishment in total darkness, creating a hidden reservoir of life cradled safely in the deep, unyielding stone. You can almost hear that soft, distant sound of water moving through the hidden walls, a steady, rhythmic pulse that asks absolutely nothing of you. Just like the deep cisterns gathering the quiet rain, your mind can simply collect these gentle moments without effort. The body grows a little heavier, the breathing naturally aligns with the slow, steady drip of the water, and there is no need to hold on to any single thought too tightly. As the moisture in the outside air settles, transforming into a soft, rolling morning mist, we can retreat into the absolute dryness and enveloping warmth of the inner chambers, where a radically different kind of nature is eternally preserved. Covering the thick walls of the most private rooms are vast, sprawling tapestries, woven in a specific, mesmerizing style known as millefleur, a beautiful, flowing word that simply translates to 1,000 flowers. Unlike the dramatic, chaotic scenes of distant history often associated with medieval textiles, millefleur tapestries presented a background of pure, absolute botanical tranquility. Master weavers spent tens of thousands of hours rendering deep, midnight blue or rich, warm crimson backgrounds, completely covering them with a dense, perfectly spaced carpet of incredibly accurate blooming flora. Wild strawberries, delicate woodland violets, white lilies, and sweet nodding columbines were rendered in thick wool and fine silk with the precise, loving accuracy of a master botanist. The heavy wool inherently absorbed the harsh echoes of the stone room, creating an acoustic deadening that felt like an embrace. Standing before one of these massive textiles is exactly like looking down into a perfect, perpetually blooming spring meadow, miraculously suspended on a vertical plane. It reveals a deep, abiding reverence for the delicate, fragile beauty of the natural world, forever capturing the fleeting magic of a May morning and weaving it permanently into a thick, warming layer of absolute stillness. That deep, deliberate reverence for preservation found its most profound, concentrated expression in a small, uniquely quiet room, usually situated in the warmest, brightest corner of the inner bailey, the scriptorium. This was the castle's dedicated chamber of writing, an acoustic void where the chaotic noise of the fortress was replaced entirely by the rhythmic, incredibly soothing sound of a sharpened goose quill gently scratching across a perfectly smooth page of stretched vellum. The creation of a single illuminated manuscript could take a solitary scribe an entire year of slow, deeply focused, meditative labour. The air in this room carried a distinct, highly comforting aroma, a dry historic blend of iron gall ink, the subtle earthiness of natural parchment, and the warm beeswax used to seal the finished bindings. The scribes patiently ground precious lapis lazuli to create blues so incredibly deep you could lose yourself in them, and applied impossibly thin layers of pure gold leaf that would catch the ambient sunlight and seemingly burn with a quiet inner fire. To imagine this room is to witness time itself being deliberately slowed down, capturing the fleeting ephemera of human knowledge and wrapping it in absolute breathtaking beauty, creating an object specifically designed to outlive its creator by 1,000 years. This absolute mastery of craft extended far beyond the microscopic details of an illuminated page, reaching up into the grand, sweeping geometry of the stone ceilings above. In certain vaulted chambers and curved stone passageways, master architects accidentally, or perhaps with unrecorded quiet genius, created profound acoustic anomalies known to history as whispering galleries. Because of the perfect, uninterrupted elliptical sweep of the vaulted stone ceilings, a sound wave produced at one specific point in the room will cling tightly to the curve of the masonry, travelling smoothly along the arc without losing any of its delicate energy. This means two people standing entirely across a vast empty hall from one another could turn their faces to the cold stone and speak in the faintest, softest, most delicate whisper imaginable. The sound travels flawlessly along the arch, arriving crisp and perfectly clear in the listener's ear, as if they were standing only an inch away, completely bypassing the vast empty air in the centre of the room. It is a magical, unseen architecture of sound, a physical manifestation of a secret. It powerfully reminds us that even the heaviest, most unyielding materials on Earth can be shaped to gently carry the most fragile, intimate human breath. Let the idea of that gentle whisper echo softly in the mind, travelling effortlessly through the dark. There is a deep, profound comfort in knowing that things can move so smoothly, that a heavy stone vault can guide a sound so perfectly. Your body can follow that same path of least resistance, sinking deeper into complete rest. The muscles in your shoulders can soften, releasing any lingering tension, trusting the surface beneath you completely. Everything is still. Everything is deeply, permanently supported. As the daylight finally fades from those high, curved ceilings and the whispering galleries fall entirely silent, the enormous hearth fires are lit. But there was another, far more intimate source of light that populated the quietest, most hidden corners of the fortress. While the high tables of the great hall glowed with expensive, imported golden beeswax, the winding service corridors and the quiet, solitary quarters were illuminated by the humble, utterly simple glow of the rushlight. At the end of the long summer, the soft, pithy cores of tall meadow rushes were carefully stripped of their outer green bark, leaving a long, porous white sponge. These delicate natural wicks were then slowly drawn through a pan of warm melted tallow or wax. Held at a slight angle in a simple standing iron pincer, a single prepared rush would burn with a tiny, steady, incredibly clean flame for exactly 1 hour. The rushlight was the medieval world's most intimate, quiet unit of time. It cast a very small, soft pool of golden light, just enough to read a few pages of a manuscript or finish a careful, deliberate stitch of fine embroidery. There is something profoundly calming about this tiny, fragile flame, bravely holding back the vast, imposing darkness of a stone castle, a tiny heartbeat of warmth that cost absolutely nothing but the quiet time it took to wander through a summer meadow. To walk slowly through a cooling castle holding such a fragile light is to pass through a series of heavy oak doors, each guarded by another masterpiece of invisible engineering, the great iron locks. In an age long before digital security or delicate microscopic tumblers, true safety was achieved through sheer, magnificent physical complexity. A medieval castle key was not a small, easily hidden thing. It was a heavy, substantial piece of cold ironwork, often intricately carved and beautiful enough to be worn openly on a thick leather belt as a highly visible symbol of profound trust. The internal mechanism of the heavy lock it opened was a three-dimensional maze of concentric iron ridges called wards. The key's uniquely cut, heavy teeth had to navigate this exact hidden puzzle in the dark. When the heavy iron key was inserted and slowly turned, the sensation was entirely tactile and deeply grounding. You could feel the heavy oiled metal sliding perfectly past the internal barriers until the main bolt was thrown with a deep, resonating, highly satisfying metallic clunk. It is the definitive acoustic signature of absolute finality, a heavy mechanical heartbeat that instantly sealed a room away from the world. The mind naturally loves the sensation of a puzzle perfectly solved, of a heavy, intricate mechanism slipping flawlessly into its intended place, effectively locking away the cares of the day and firmly securing the peace of the night. This deep, structural appreciation for the precious and the protected was not limited to grand rooms or fine textiles. It extended directly to the very centre of the dining tables. In the grand hall, surrounded by massive platters of roasted meats and heavy trenchers of bread, the most valuable and carefully guarded object was often a small, incredibly ornate vessel sitting directly in front of the lord and lady. This was the great salt cellar. In an era where preservation literally meant survival, pure white sea salt was a commodity of immense, staggering value, completely essential for safely carrying the autumn harvest through the deep, frozen suspension of winter. The cellars themselves were masterworks of the goldsmith's art, often shaped like tiny, delicate castles, sailing ships, or mythical beasts, crafted from pure silver, gold, and polished rock crystal. But the true breathtaking treasure was the quiet, geometric perfection of the salt crystals inside. Painstakingly evaporated from coastal waters in shallow clay pans under the hot summer sun, these tiny, perfect white cubes caught the flickering ambient candlelight shining brightly like a pile of crushed diamonds. It beautifully changes our perspective, taking something we now view as endlessly common and gently elevating it to a profound object of absolute reverence, a tiny, glowing mountain of pure preservation sitting quietly in the centre of a chaotic world. It is deeply soothing to remember how carefully, how intentionally these small things were protected, just like the heavy key turning smoothly in the well-oiled lock, or the salt carefully, patiently gathered from the sea. Your own mind is entirely safe to carefully file away the events of the day. The breath is slow and steady. The limbs are heavy and warm. You're firmly anchored in this quiet, drifting stream of thought, safely and securely held in the present moment. If you were to trace the origin of the deeply fragrant botanical medicines carefully locked away in the private quarters, your path would lead you back outside, into a highly specific, mathematically precise section of the courtyard known as the Physic Garden. Here, the castle's apothecary cultivated a vibrant, living, intensely fragrant library of healing plants, heavily influenced by an ancient, deeply poetic philosophy known as the doctrine of signatures. This was the profound, beautiful belief that the earth deliberately marked every single plant with a subtle visual clue, a physical signature indicating exactly what it was meant to heal. The delicate, lobe-shaped, spotted leaves of the lungwort plant were believed to cure the chest because they closely resembled human breath. The bright, glowing yellow sap of the celandine was carefully harvested to soothe the complexion, and the intricate, deeply folded surface of the walnut was gathered to calm the mind. Walking slowly through this quiet, enclosed space in the late afternoon, brushing your hands against the rough, fragrant leaves of lemon balm and the soft, feathery fronds of sweet fennel, was to walk through a living, breathing apothecary of deep earth magic. It reveals a worldview where humanity was never isolated from nature, but intimately, intrinsically connected to it, reading the living landscape like a gentle, reassuring medical text written by the universe itself. As the deepest, heaviest part of the night finally takes hold, masking the fragrant Physic Garden in absolute velvety darkness, the gaze of the castle's most learned inhabitants naturally drifted upwards. High on the flat, lead-lined roofs of the tallest stone towers, far above the hazy, drifting smoke of the courtyard fires, early astronomers set up quiet, solitary observatories. In a world completely devoid of modern light pollution, the medieval night sky was not a distant, faint scattering of stars, but a violently beautiful, overwhelming tapestry of the Milky Way, pressing down thick and heavy over the silent earth. Using incredibly complex, beautifully etched brass instruments known as astrolabes, these quiet, heavily cloaked scholars spent the freezing, silent hours measuring the precise angles of the stars, tracking the slow, majestic, inevitable rotation of the celestial spheres. The astrolabe itself was a breathtaking piece of pocket-sized architecture, a completely flat, two-dimensional map of the entire three-dimensional universe, held right in the palm of a cold hand. Standing on that high tower, aligning the cold brass sights with the glowing light of Sirius or the distant blue of Vega, connected the heavy, earthbound stone of the castle directly to the infinite silent clockwork of the cosmos. And as those stars continue their slow, imperceptible, brilliant arc across that vast, unbroken black canopy, gently shifting the shadows of the battlements inch by inch across the quiet courtyards, the deepest, oldest layers of the fortress continue to hold their silent watch, guarding secrets woven even deeper into the heavy tapestry of the past. To truly understand those deepest secrets, we must follow the heavy stone foundations back down from the starry observatories, descending to where the ancient masonry meets the sunlit, warming earth. In the thick, sun-baked expanses of the massive south-facing curtain walls, architects deliberately carved out rows of small, beautifully arched alcoves known entirely as bee bowls. Rather than keeping fragile hives out in the unpredictable open winds of the fields, these deep protective niches were engineered directly into the castle's exterior armour. Here, under the sheltering arch of solid rock, woven straw domes called skeps were safely tucked away, housing tens of thousands of gentle honeybees. Throughout the long, golden afternoons, the stone absorbed the intense heat of the sun, wrapping the hives in a permanent radiating cocoon of warmth that protected the colonies through the bitterest frosts. If you were to press your ear against the rough stone wall near one of these bowls on a warm summer evening, you would hear a low, mesmerizing, constant vibration echoing deep within the rock itself. It is a wondrous, hidden harmony, the heaviest, most impenetrable fortress of human engineering vibrating softly with the delicate, tireless hum of the natural world's most vital architects. That same warm amber light that bathed the southern walls often found its way into the most secluded, intimate spiritual spaces of the fortress, but it did not always enter through glass. In the quietest private chapels and earlier stone sanctuaries, before the intricate stained glass of later centuries became common, builders utilised a breathtakingly beautiful alternative, thinly sliced panels of pure alabaster. This remarkably soft, pale mineral could be painstakingly polished down until it was only millimetres thick, at which point it underwent a magical transformation. It ceased to be an opaque rock and became wonderfully translucent. When these wide panels of creamy alabaster were set securely into the high-arched windows, they completely obscured the chaotic outside world, preventing anyone from looking in or out. Instead, they caught the harsh, direct rays of the afternoon sun and diffused them perfectly, flooding the quiet, echoing chapel with a soft, milky, golden-pink luminescence. To sit quietly in a room illuminated entirely by glowing stone is to experience an atmosphere of absolute enveloping serenity. It feels as though the massive walls themselves are slowly radiating an ancient captured daylight, bathing the space in a warm, eternal twilight that instantly calms the racing heart. Stepping out from that golden, stony glow and walking toward the edge of the dark, reflective moat, you might notice a small, beautifully carved wooden boat tethered quietly to a set of wet stone stairs. For those who dwelled within the crowded, bustling interior of the main fortress, true mental respite was often found just beyond the heavy gates in a separate, unfortified sanctuary known wonderfully as the Pleasance. This was a sprawling, dedicated pleasure landscape, purposely built at a slight distance from the towering shadows of the keep. To reach it, inhabitants would step into the small boat and be rowed in absolute silence across the smooth, dark water of the moat, leaving the intimidating reality of the fortress entirely behind them. The Pleasance was a manicured wilderness of winding turf labyrinths, heavily shaded orchards of sweet pear and cherry trees, and grassy banks deliberately left wild to encourage the soft flutter of butterflies. The short, incredibly smooth boat ride across the water acted as a psychological airlock, a physical and mental transition that washed away the heavy responsibilities of the day and delivered the passenger into a separate floating world dedicated entirely to leisure, beauty, and the simple act of breathing the open air. Your mind can glide just as smoothly across the quiet waters of this evening. There is no effort required to row, no destination you must urgently reach. The body sinks a little deeper into the softness beneath you, completely supported, as the gentle current of the narrative simply carries you forward. Within these lush, sprawling lower gardens and sun-drenched lower courtyards, a flash of startling, vibrant colour often moved gracefully against the backdrop of the grey, weathered stone. Castles frequently kept small flocks of magnificent, free-roaming peacocks, allowing them to wander unchecked across the manicured lawns and high, grassy ramparts. While we might assume every animal within a medieval estate served a strictly utilitarian purpose of labour or food, these iridescent birds were maintained almost exclusively for the sheer, breathtaking visual poetry they provided. As Peacock slowly unfurled its massive shimmering train of deep, azure, emerald and spun gold, it created a magnificent living tapestry that rivaled the finest textiles hanging inside the Great Hall. Furthermore, in the ancient mindset, these beautiful creatures were surrounded by a calming mystical aura. It was widely believed that the flesh of a peacock was entirely incorruptible and would never fade or decay. Having them slowly pace the grounds was not merely a display of vast wealth, but a quiet, living symbol of immortality and permanence, a visual reminder that beauty could endure indefinitely even within the imposing hardened walls of a military stronghold. As the late afternoon sun finally dips below those high, grassy ramparts and the evening chill begins to settle over the lawns, the focus naturally shifts back indoors, drawn magnetically to the massive, cavernous hearths of the grand chambers. To tame the roaring, chaotic energy of a massive oakwood fire, blacksmiths poured molten iron into wide, heavy sand moulds to create magnificent architectural shields known as firebacks. These immense, solid slabs of cast iron were leaned directly against the back wall of the stone fireplace, directly behind the leaping flames. They served a brilliant dual purpose. First, they protected the vulnerable mortar and brickwork from slowly crumbling under the intense continuous heat. But more importantly, the dark, heavy metal acted as a colossal thermal mirror. It greedily absorbed the chaotic heat of the fire and then pushed it gently and steadily out into the centre of the drafty room. The surface of the fireback was almost never left blank. It was intricately moulded with deeply calming pastoral scenes of resting stags, intricate blooming vines or sleeping hounds. As the orange flames danced and flickered, the shadows moving across the carved iron made the heavy metal scenes appear to gently breathe and shift, providing a mesmerising, hypnotic focal point for tired eyes as the room was wrapped in a steady, radiating wave of immense warmth. Hovering securely above the grand hearth, hidden subtly in the dark, carved wooden panelling of the upper hall was another invisible layer of medieval comfort. If you looked closely at the high wooden balconies overlooking the main floor, you might notice the delicate interwoven lattices of carved wood that formed the minstrel's gallery. This was a highly elevated, often completely concealed architectural loft designed exclusively for musicians playing soft, delicate instruments like the harp, the wooden flute, and the wire-strung lute. Because the gallery was suspended high against the curving stone ceiling, the natural acoustics of the room gathered the fragile plucked notes and cascaded them smoothly down over the inhabitants below like a gentle, invisible waterfall. By keeping the musicians partially or entirely out of sight behind the decorative screens, the architects created a profound, almost magical sensory illusion. The soothing, melodic music seemed to have no human source at all. It felt as though the castle itself were softly singing. It transformed the vast, imposing space into an instrument of pure tranquility, where melodic waves washed over the room from the heavens, naturally encouraging the shoulders to drop and the mind to soften into the evening. Letting the gentle rhythm of that unseen music wash over you, the remaining tension of the waking world can simply dissolve into the shadows. You're anchored in a place where everything heavy is held by the stone, and your only task is to listen, to rest, and to let the quiet details of history smooth the edges of the night. Following the faint, lingering echo of that lute music through a heavy oak door, you might step into a much smaller, intensely quiet room filled with the unmistakable, rich scent of aged leather and dry cedar. This was the master's private study, and resting heavily on the floor was the armarium, the grand book chest. Long before books were casually lined up vertically on open shelves, they were considered incredibly rare, staggeringly valuable treasures that were meant to be laid completely flat, heavily protected, and hidden away. A castle's library did not look like a modern room of endless spines. It was a collection of massive, iron-bound wooden chests. When you slowly lifted the heavy, groaning lid of an armarium, you were greeted by the magnificent sight of enormous manuscripts, bound tightly in thick crimson velvet and supple, pale pigskin, held securely shut with beautifully wrought silver clasps. The act of reading was a deeply physical, entirely deliberate ritual. Unlocking the silver clasp, feeling the immense heavy weight of the book in your hands, and slowly turning the vast, thick pages of stiff vellum forced the reader to slow down entirely. It was a tactile, grounded experience that demanded total quiet presence, a sanctuary of still, silent thought preserved perfectly within a wooden vault. Looking out from the high, narrow window of that private study as the morning light returns, a breathtaking marvel of quiet, botanical geometry spreads out on the earth below. This was the knot garden, a masterwork of horticultural control where low, dense, aromatic shrubs like boxwood, dark green lavender, and silvery cotton lavender were planted and meticulously sheared into flawless intertwining patterns. From the ground, it was a fragrant, neatly trimmed maze of herbs, but from the elevated perspective of the high castle windows, its true, magnificent purpose was suddenly revealed. The deeply contrasting colours of the plants formed an endless, unbroken, intricately looping ribbon, mirroring the infinite sweeping lines of a Celtic knot. There was no beginning and no end to the design. In a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable, gazing down at the flawless, absolute symmetry of the knot garden was meant to instantly soothe the troubled mind. It was a physical representation of divine order and eternal continuity, a mesmerizing woven carpet of living green that captured the wandering eye and guided it along a smooth, infinite, restful path. If you were to leave the high window and descend far below those living green ribbons, wandering deep into the coolest, driest subterranean vaults beneath the courtyard, you would be enveloped by a completely different, wonderfully comforting aroma. Tucked far away from the dampness of the main cellars were the apple lofts. These were dedicated, highly ventilated underground chambers built specifically to safely carry the sweetness of the autumn harvest through the dead of winter. Thousands of carefully hand-picked apples, entirely unbruised and perfect, were laid out one by one on expansive slatted racks of untreated pine. The room was kept in absolute darkness, resting at a perfect, unchanging, cool temperature that suspended the fruit in a state of deep, unaging sleep. Stepping into the apple loft was like walking into a concentrated cloud of late autumn magic. The air was thick with the incredibly sweet, mellow, slightly cider-like perfume of the resting fruit, mingled with the dry, clean scent of the wooden racks and the faint, grounding aroma of the packed earth floor. It is a profoundly reassuring space, a hidden vault where the vibrant, sun-drenched energy of the orchards was safely, quietly sleeping in the dark, waiting patiently for the deep winter to pass. When the deepest part of the night finally returns, bringing an end to the long, slow wandering through the fortress, the ultimate sanctuary of rest was found inside the grand bedchamber. But a true medieval bed was not merely a piece of wooden furniture. It was an elaborate, breathtaking architectural structure in its own right, commonly known as the bed of estate. Rising high above the mattress was an intricately carved wooden canopy called a tester, from which hung thick, incredibly heavy, floor-length curtains of deeply woven wool, rich damask, or soft velvet. When the lord and lady retired for the night, these massive heavy curtains were drawn entirely shut on all four sides. The bed instantly transformed into a completely separate, suspended room within a room. The heavy fabric completely blocked out any flickering light from the dying hearth, perfectly muffled the howling of the wind against the stone walls, and trapped the body's natural warmth in a small, deeply intimate cocoon. Lying within this enclosed velvet-lined sanctuary, you were completely isolated from the vast, echoing cavern of the castle, floating gently in a completely dark, totally silent, perfectly warm, suspended island of absolute peace. Drifting deeply into that soft, heavy velvet darkness, the mind can safely release its grip on the waking hours, sinking into the quiet spaces between the ancient stones as we continue our slow, gentle journey into the hidden wonders that lie just beyond the edge of sleep. As you slowly pull back those heavy velvet curtains of the bedchamber to welcome the new day and step softly onto the chamber floor, your feet do not meet cold, bare rock. Instead, they press against a vast, intricate mosaic of warm, beautifully baked clay. These are encaustic tiles, an absolute masterpiece of medieval ceramic artistry. Rather than simply painting a delicate, fragile pattern on the top surface of the clay, where it would inevitably be worn completely away by decades of heavy leather boots and sweeping, the master tilers carved deep, incredibly precise geometric grooves into the wet red earth. They then painstakingly filled these empty voids with a contrasting liquid white clay, baking them together in the roaring, transformative heat of the kiln. The beautiful looping patterns of stylized lions, blooming lilies, and complex interlocking stars ran entirely through the solid body of the tile. This brilliant permanent technique meant that no matter how many centuries slowly passed, no matter how many generations walked across that very same floor, the beautiful design would never fade, never blur, and never erase. It is a profound, deeply grounding thought. The floor beneath you is not just a simple walking surface, but a permanent, enduring artwork of the earth itself, holding fast to its original beauty despite the endless, heavy tread of time. Following that continuous, unbroken pattern of warm clay tiles out into the cool, stone-lined corridors of the keep, you might brush your hand gently against the rough, pale mortar, holding the massive granite blocks together. This seemingly simple, dusty substance possesses an almost magical, deeply reassuring secret. The ancient lime mortar used in these towering walls is not a static, brittle material. It is entirely alive, constantly reacting to the weather over hundreds of years. When a microscopic crack naturally forms in the masonry, and the soft, rhythmic autumn rain washes against the side of the castle, the rainwater dissolves a tiny, invisible amount of the free lime hidden deep within the mortar. As that water slowly evaporates in the afternoon sun, the lime pulls carbon dioxide from the very air, chemically transforming back into solid limestone, effectively sealing the crack completely shut. The castle breathes with the weather. It gently, quietly heals its own wounds. This slow, silent, microscopic process of constant regeneration means the massive walls actually grow stronger and more unified with every passing century. A comforting, beautiful reminder that some things are naturally built to gently repair themselves over time, requiring absolutely no effort, just the passage of the seasons and the falling of the rain. You can feel that same quiet resilience settling into your own body right now. There is no need to repair or resolve everything at once. The mind can simply rest, allowing time and stillness to do their slow, invisible work. The breath deepens, settling into a rhythm as old and steady as the stone. That steady, rhythmic breath might naturally draw your attention to the way the morning light enters the thickest, most heavily fortified parts of the fortress. At first glance from the outside courtyard, the windows of a heavy keep appear to be nothing more than impossibly narrow, dark, vertical slits, designed only to keep the world out. Yet, when you stand completely still inside the room, it is flooded with a soft, expansive golden glow. This breathtaking optical illusion is the result of brilliant subtractive sculpting, known to architects as a splayed window embrasure. The master stonemasons carved away massive diagonal cones of solid rock on the interior, tapering widely from the tiny restrictive outer slit to a vast, beautifully open archway inside the chamber. They essentially created a giant stone megaphone for sunlight. When a single, thin, intense beam of direct sun strikes that narrow opening, it hits the smooth, angled interior walls and gently fans out, softly and perfectly diffusing the harsh rays across the entire room. It is a magnificent physical lesson in shifting perspective. By deliberately carving away the heavy, unyielding obstacles, a tiny, restricted thread of light is miraculously transformed into a vast, glowing pool of warmth, reminding us that even the smallest opening can beautifully illuminate an entire room if the space is carefully shaped to welcome it. Looking down through one of those glowing, fanned-out stone archways, past the sheer, dizzying drop of the outer curtain wall, you might see a landscape dotted with several perfectly geometric glassy pools of water. Distinctly separate from the defensive moat, these were the castle's stew ponds, or ancient vivaria. These deeply excavated, clay-lined rectangular pools were essential, living larders, meticulously maintained to breed heavy carp, tench, and sleek silver trout for the long winter months. Because they were deliberately shielded by high, grassy earthen banks and completely sheltered from the chaotic wind, the surface of these ponds remained impossibly still, acting as enormous, flawless mirrors laid flat upon the earth. On a calm, quiet afternoon, they perfectly and smoothly reflected the towering battlements, the passing white clouds, and the slow, majestic flight of a hunting hawk circling above. Walking slowly along the grassy, raised pathways between these glassy pools, looking directly down into the dark, silent water, one could watch the hypnotic, slow-motion gliding of the heavy golden carp just beneath the surface. It was an environment of profound, hushed tranquility, where the frantic, noisy pace of the world above was instantly absorbed and completely silenced by the cool, deep, unmoving water. That deeply calming presence of perfectly still water was entirely too precious to leave completely outside the thick walls. Approaching the heavy, intricately carved oak doors of the great dining hall, you would often encounter a beautiful, highly ornate stone niche set directly into the wall, known beautifully as the lavabo. This was a communal washing station, a masterpiece of domestic plumbing in an age defined by heavy iron and rough stone. From an intricately carved brass spout, often shaped like a serene lion's head or a resting folded dove, a thin, perfectly continuous stream of pure water trickled gently down into a wide, shallow, lead-lined basin. But this was rarely just ordinary water. The castle's apothecary would frequently steep vast quantities of crushed damask rose petals, fresh rosemary, or calming lavender directly into the overhead stone cisterns. As the water fell, it filled the heavy, shadowed stone corridor with a delicate, incredibly sweet perfume, and the light, highly musical, crystalline sound of softly splashing water. Pausing here to let the cool, beautifully scented water run slowly over tired hands was a deliberate, highly sensory ritual. a quiet, purifying moment of physical transition that literally and metaphorically washed away the heavy, dusty toils of the day before the inhabitants broke bread. Let that soft, echoing musical sound of trickling water wash over your thoughts, smoothing away any lingering edges of the day. Nothing needs to be held tightly. You're merely a quiet observer, drifting effortlessly through these ancient scented corridors, allowing the gentle weight of relaxation to pull you deeper into a state of absolute, unwavering calm. As you listen to the delicate music of the water, you might hear another, entirely different gentle sound echoing faintly from the high exterior walls. The soft, rapid, highly rhythmic chattering of small birds. When looking closely at the sheer, vertical face of a massive stone keep, you will almost always notice dozens of perfectly square, uniform, dark holes dotting the masonry in long horizontal lines. These are putlog holes, the ancient ghostly footprints of the heavy wooden scaffolding that originally held the masons suspended high in the sky. When the castle was finally completed and the heavy timber platforms were carefully dismantled, the architects deliberately left these deep, square voids open to the air. Over the ensuing centuries, these high, sheltered, perfectly protected stone pockets became permanent, generation-spanning homes for massive flocks of swooping swifts, house martins and swallows. What began as a rigid, purely functional engineering necessity transformed seamlessly into a living, breathing, high-altitude sanctuary. The intimidating castle effectively became an enormous, man-made cliff face, a vertical, deeply protected nature reserve where the evening air was constantly filled with the joyous, sweeping, mesmerizing acrobatics of tiny wings dancing against the darkening sky. Higher still, where those swallows dive and turn against the soft, bruised clouds of the late afternoon, the roofline of certain magnificent European fortresses offered a staggering, completely unexpected explosion of vibrant colour. While many heavy structures relied on the muted, sombre grey of sheet lead or the organic, fading brown of wooden oak shingles, some regions, particularly in the lush landscapes of Burgundy, topped their castles with brilliant, highly glazed ceramic tiles. Master potters fired tens of thousands of flat clay tiles, carefully coating them in thick, glass-like glazes of deep, vibrant emerald green, bright mustard yellow, rich oxblood red, and jet black. These were laid in vast, impossibly complex, interlocking geometric patterns, transforming the massive, heavily sloping roofs into gigantic, colourful tapestries stretched tightly against the heavens. After a passing afternoon rain shower, when the dark clouds suddenly broke and the sun triumphantly emerged, these wet, glassy tiles would catch the light and absolutely blaze with deep colour, shining fiercely like a colossal mosaic of polished gemstones. It was a breathtaking, brilliant contrast. The heavy, impenetrable, sombre military walls below, crowned by an impossibly delicate, colourful, shining work of art that seemed to float as lightly as a feather above the ancient treetops. Far below that brilliant, shining roof, hidden entirely from the eyes of the bustling courtyards and the grand, echoing public halls, exists a fascinating, completely invisible network of movement. By exploiting the immense, sometimes 15-foot thickness of the main structural walls, architects frequently hollowed out narrow, perfectly smooth, completely hidden corridors known as intramural passages. These secret windowless tunnels snaked their way entirely through the solid, unyielding rock, gracefully connecting distant watchtowers, private bedchambers, and quiet spiritual chapels without ever once exposing the traveller to the open air. Walking slowly down one of these hidden arteries is a profoundly surreal, deeply muffling experience. The stone on either side, above and below, is so incredibly thick that every single sound from the outside world is completely annihilated. There is only absolute heavy velvet silence, the faint, clean smell of cold limestone, and the soft, rhythmic padding of your own footsteps echoing softly ahead of you. It feels exactly like moving through the very marrow of the building itself, a secret, secure, deeply personal pathway that wraps you securely in tons of protective earth, rendering you completely invisible and entirely safe from the chaos of the visible world. If you were to follow one of those silent descending staircases all the way down to the naturally cooled, heavy vaulted rooms of the ground floor, you would eventually enter a space dedicated entirely to the slow, patient, unhurried magic of time. This is the Buttery. Despite its misleading name, it had absolutely nothing to do with dairy. It derived directly from the ancient word botte, meaning a large wooden cask. This vast, low-ceilinged stone chamber was a quiet, dimly lit, incredibly fragrant forest of massive resting oak barrels bound tightly in heavy iron hoops. Here, in the absolute dark, at a naturally perfect, completely unwavering temperature of 55 degrees, hundreds of gallons of ale, cider and rich wine were left to slowly, quietly mature. The air in this room was heavy, incredibly rich, and deeply complex, smelling beautifully of damp earth, sweet yeast, toasted oak wood, and the faint fruity tang of slow fermentation. It was a room entirely, beautifully dedicated to the act of waiting. There was absolutely no rushing the profound process happening inside the barrels. The quiet, heavy stillness of the Buttery is a beautiful aromatic testament to the virtue of profound patience, allowing nature to slowly, deliberately transform raw ingredients into something incredibly rich, deep, and deeply comforting over the long, dark, undisturbed months. Let that deep, patient stillness seep into your very bones. The slow maturation in the dark, the quiet turning of the days. You do not need to count the hours, for the passage of time here is gentle, perfectly measured, and beautifully kept in the shadows. Eventually, as the centuries slowly passed and the Middle Ages began to gently wane, the measurement of that gentle time became a breathtaking masterpiece of art and brass mechanics. In the highest, most secure towers of the most advanced castles, the chaotic, irregular hours of the sun and the night watchman's horn were beautifully replaced by the mesmerizing, rhythmic, deeply soothing ticking of the very first mechanical astronomical clocks. These were not the simple, rapidly spinning, stressful dials of the modern era. These monumental iron and brass mechanisms were incredibly slow, profoundly complex works of moving sculpture. They possessed multiple brightly painted faces of hammered gold and deep lapis blue, designed to track much more than just the passing hours of the day. Slowly, completely imperceptibly, heavy iron hands would rotate to quietly display the shifting silver faces of the moon, the exact creeping position of the sun through the ancient houses of the zodiac, and the subtle, inevitable changing of the seasons. Standing in the quiet, dusty tower room, listening to the heavy, deliberate, metallic heartbeat of the great escapement wheel slowly ticking back and forth, you could literally hear the vast, majestic mechanics of the universe being perfectly translated into moving iron. It was a deeply hypnotic, fundamentally comforting sound, anchoring the sprawling stone fortress directly to the infinite, precise, and completely reliable turning of the stars. As that heavy, rhythmic ticking softly echoes down the spiral stairs, marking the gentle passage of the night, we can follow its steady pulse deeper into the ancient estate, where the boundaries between the hardened fortress and the wild, whispering forest begin to beautifully, softly blur into a tapestry of deep greens and silver light. Beyond the sheer defensive drop of the curtain walls, the castle's influence extended into a vast protected landscape known as the hunting park. This was not a site of frantic pursuit, but a carefully managed sanctuary of immense ancient trees, venerable oaks, beeches, and elms that were already centuries old when the first stone of the keep was laid. These trees were often pollarded, a beautiful and deliberate practice of pruning the upper branches to encourage a dense, bushy crown of growth. This created a fantastical, almost dreamlike forest of massive gnarled trunks and sprawling, vibrant canopies that provided a permanent, lush habitat for herds of fallow deer and wild white cattle. Walking through this emerald light, where the air is cool and smells of crushed ferns and damp moss, one feels the castle's true scale, not as a lonely island of stone, but as the quiet heart of a living, breathing kingdom. It reveals a profound understanding of stewardship, where the wildness of nature was not conquered, but held in a gentle, rhythmic balance, creating a perimeter of absolute shaded peace that stood guard around the fortress like a silent, leafy army. The soft, dappled light of those ancient hunting parks often found a beautiful indoor reflection in the presence of the castle's most delicate inhabitants, the songbirds of the Lady Solar. In the quietest, sunniest reaches of the inner apartments, it was common to find exquisitely crafted cages of fine, woven brass wire or polished wood, housing vibrant goldfinches, linnets, or nightingales. These birds were cherished for their ability to bring the melodic, untamed joy of the forest directly into the heavy stone heart of the keep. Their song, clear and liquid like a mountain stream, filled the high-vaulted rooms, softening the acoustic starkness of the masonry. During the long, slow afternoons, the birds would bathe in small, shallow dishes of hammered silver, their fluttering wings scattering tiny, glittering droplets of water that caught the sunlight like falling diamonds. This presence of living music served as a constant, gentle bridge between the rigid permanence of the architecture and the fleeting, joyful spontaneity of life. It reminds us that even in a world of high walls and heavy iron, there was always a dedicated space for the light, the small and the beautifully melodic, allowing the mind to drift on the wings of a song. Let your thoughts drift just as easily as those melodic notes, rising and falling without effort. There is nothing you need to accomplish, no walls you need to climb. Your body is settling into a state of profound, natural grace, much like the deep roots of the forest trees reaching into the cool, supporting earth. Every breath is a quiet homecoming. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long violet shadows across the park, the evening light strikes the upper ramparts, revealing the ingenious, hidden warmth of the castle's chimney stacks. While early fortresses relied on central hearths that filled the rooms with a hazy atmospheric smoke, the later development of the vertical flue was a masterpiece of thermal engineering. These chimneys were often built into the very thickness of the exterior walls, rising like secret stone arteries toward the sky. They were topped with magnificent, highly decorative pots of carved stone or moulded brick, often twisted into elaborate spirals or shaped like miniature towers. The draft created by these tall, slender shafts was so perfectly calibrated that it pulled every stray wisp of smoke upward, leaving the air in the private chambers remarkably clear, sweet, and still. But the true genius lay in the masonry itself. As the hot smoke rose, it heated the entire vertical column of stone, turning the wall into a massive radiating surface of gentle warmth that persisted long after the fire had burned down to glowing embers. To lean your back against one of these warm interior walls in the deep of winter was to experience a profound, radiant comfort that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the building. If you were to follow one of those warm stone walls down to the lower courtyards, you might notice the ground beneath your feet changing from rough flagstone to a soft, resilient, and surprisingly aromatic surface. In the areas surrounding the stables and the inner gates, the ground was frequently layered with a thick, springy carpet of spent hops, the dried flowers left over from the castle's brewing process. This was a brilliant organic solution to the problem of dampness and noise. The thick layer of hops absorbed the moisture from the frequent rains, preventing the courtyard from becoming muddy, while simultaneously muffling the sharp, metallic clatter of iron-shod hooves and the heavy thud of wooden cartwheels. As the horses walked over the hops, their weight released a deep, earthy, slightly spicy fragrance that mingled with the scent of hay and clean wood smoke. It transformed the functional, busy areas of the castle into a cushioned, sensory-rich environment where every movement was softened and every sound was hushed. It is a beautiful example of the medieval world's circular economy, where the byproduct of a quiet afternoon's brewing became the very foundation of a peaceful, aromatic courtyard. That sense of softened sound and cushioned movement reached its peak in the most private, sacred area of the fortress, the oratory. This tiny, personal chapel was often built as a wooden-panelled nest, tucked within the upper floors of a stone tower. Unlike the grand, echoing public chapel, the oratory was a space of absolute velvet silence. The walls were lined with dark, polished English oak or fragrant Mediterranean cedar, which acted as a natural acoustic buffer, swallowing even the faintest whisper of the wind outside. Within this small, scented chamber, the only light came from a single thick candle of green beeswax, which burned with a slow, steady flame. The floor was covered in heavy, hand-knotted rugs imported from the east, which were so thick they completely silenced any footstep. Sitting in the oratory was like being held in a wooden cradle of deep reflection. It was a room specifically designed for the solitary mind to find its centre, far removed from the weight of the crown or the demands of the estate. It serves as a reminder that the architects of these great stone giants understood the vital importance of the small space, the intimate, quiet corner where one can simply be, sheltered by wood and silence. Nothing needs your attention now but the rhythm of your own breath, moving as steadily and as quietly as the flame of a single candle. You are safely enclosed in your own sanctuary, protected by the layers of time and the softness of the narrative. The world outside is vast and distant, while here, in this moment, there is only stillness and the gentle weight of complete relaxation. Stepping out from the silent oratory into the higher, wind-swept walkways of the battlements, you might find yourself looking at the very edges of the stone, where the master builders left a hidden, poetic detail. Along the underside of the projecting stone galleries, or machicolations, they often carved delicate, repeating patterns of waterleaf or acanthus, designs that would never be seen from the ground below. These carvings were not for the eyes of the public, nor were they a display of vanity. They were hidden beauties, created entirely for the satisfaction of the craft, and as a quiet tribute to the permanence of the structure. They suggest a philosophy where every inch of a building, no matter how remote or obscured, deserved the same meticulous care and artistry as the grandest hall. In the golden hour, when the setting sun reflects off the surface of the moat and casts ripples of dancing light upward, these hidden carvings are momentarily illuminated, flickering in the shadows like ghosts of the mason's chisel. It reveals a world where excellence was a silent, private vow, a commitment to creating something perfect even in the places where only the birds and the wind would ever witness it. Descending from those high, carved shadows, we return to the very heart of the castle's life, the great hall during the turning of the light. As evening settled, the heavy, high-backed wooden chairs were moved closer to the hearth, and a massive polished brass bowl known as a brazier was filled with glowing charcoal and fragrant pine cones. This portable source of heat could be moved to any corner of the room, providing a mobile, radiant warmth that followed the inhabitants as they moved. But the most mesmerizing aspect of the evening was the use of fire dogs, or andirons. These heavy iron supports for the logs were often topped with cast iron heads of mythical beasts or sleeping lions. As the sap in the green wood heated up, it would hiss and whistle, creating a soft domestic symphony of sounds that combined with the rhythmic crackle of the flames. The iron lions would glow a soft cherry red in the heat, appearing to come alive in the shifting firelight. This was the true social anchor of the castle, a communal space where the flickering light and the steady warmth created a shared hypnotic state, a collective slowing down that prepared everyone for the deep restorative silence of the medieval night. This communal warmth was beautifully balanced by the individual comfort provided by the castle's night furs. In an age of stone walls and winter chills, the true luxury of the evening was not found in gold or jewels, but in the possession of a heavy, supple coverlet, lined entirely with the fur of the Arctic fox, the squirrel, or the softest rabbit. These were not mere blankets. They were enormous, enveloping weights of natural insulation that were often scented with dried meadowsweet and kept in cedar-lined chests until the very moment of retirement. When you slipped beneath a night fur, the immediate overwhelming softness and the trapped radiant warmth of your own body created an instant biological signal to sleep. The weight of the fur acted like a deep pressure embrace, grounding the body and quieting the nervous system. It is a profound tactile memory of safety, a reminder that the ultimate purpose of the castle was to provide a space where a human being could be vulnerable enough to close their eyes and drift away, wrapped in the softest, warmest materials the earth could provide. Let that feeling of a heavy, warm embrace settle over you now. The limbs feel weighted and relaxed, the skin feels cool while the core feels warm, and the mattress beneath you is as firm and as reliable as the castle's bedrock. You're drifting into a place where the air is perfectly still, and the only sound is the gentle, distant hum of the world at rest. Beyond the soft warmth of the bedchamber, deep in the subterranean foundations of the North Tower, lay the cool vault, the castle's dedicated sanctuary for the preservation of delicate summer-born flavours. This was where the sucade, fruits preserved in thick, clear honey or heavy sugar syrup, was stored in heavy jars of glazed stoneware. Quinces, plums, and ginger roots were submerged in these golden liquids, effectively frozen in time. The vault was built with a floor of deep, river-washed sand, which was kept slightly damp to maintain a constant, humid cool that prevented the honey from crystallizing. Entering this room was a sensory journey. The air was thick with the scent of fermented fruit and the clean, sharp tang of the wet sand. These preserved treats were the concentrated sunshine of the winter months, a beautiful, edible archive of the passing seasons. It reveals a magnificent patience, a willingness to wait for the exact right moment to enjoy the fruits of the labour, proving that in the castle, time was a resource to be savoured, not a clock to be raced against. Finally, as we reach the deepest hour of the night, the castle reveals its most subtle acoustic secret, the wind chime of the banners. High atop the turrets, the long, slender silk heraldic banners and pennants would catch the steady nocturnal breeze. Because they were made of heavy, densely woven silk and weighted with gold fringe, they did not flap or snap in the wind like modern synthetic flags. Instead, they made a low, fluttering rhythmic sound, a soft thrumming that resonated down through the wooden flagpoles and into the stone structure itself. It was a subtle, vibrating pulse, like the purring of a giant cat that could be felt more than heard in the upper rooms. This gentle vibration was a constant, reassuring presence, a signal that the castle was breathing with the air of the countryside. It was the final melodic layer of protection, a soft, silk-voiced lullaby that spoke of identity, history, and the enduring, quiet strength of a home built to withstand the winds of eternity. As the silken banners continue their slow, rhythmic dance in the cool night air, the entire fortress settles into a state of absolute, unmoving grace, as if the stones themselves are dreaming of the centuries yet to come. To truly understand the magnificent, breathtaking scale of those ancient stony dreams, you must slowly lift your gaze from the heavy, earth-bound foundations and look toward the very higher ceilings of the grand public halls. Floating impossibly high above the empty, quiet air is a staggering masterpiece of medieval carpentry known as the hammer beam roof. Rather than relying on simple, flat, horizontal beams that would severely limit the soaring width of a room, master carpenters engineered a stunning interlocking puzzle of massive oak timbers that stepped gracefully inward, reaching ever upward toward the centre of the sky. What is truly miraculous is that these colossal, sweeping wooden arches, frequently adorned with beautifully carved downward-gazing wooden angels with gilded wings, were constructed entirely without the use of a single iron nail. They are held in the air completely by the sheer, unyielding genius of their own weight, perfectly balanced and locked together by incredibly complex wooden joints that tighten as the wood ages. It is a profound architectural reminder that true, enduring strength is not always found in rigid iron or unyielding stone, but in perfect, elegant balance, allowing thousands of pounds of fragrant ancient oak to seemingly float above you as lightly and effortlessly as a canopy of summer leaves. When the first pale silver rays of the morning sun finally reach down from those high wooden arches and spill softly against the massive exterior walls, the light actively searches for a much smaller, far more intimate marker of the passing day. Carved directly into the rough pale limestone right beside the quiet shadowed entrance of the private chapel, you might find a series of tiny, delicate, radiating lines forming a subtle half circle. These are ancient scratch dials, or mass dials. They possessed no moving brass gears, no heavy weights, and no ticking hands to induce urgency. Instead, a solitary monk or a quiet passerby would simply place a small, straight wooden peg into a small, perfectly drilled hole at the centre of the carving. The gentle morning sun would cast a tiny, incredibly sharp shadow across the lines, silently indicating the precise moment for quiet reflection or morning prayer. It is a deeply personal, beautifully ephemeral clock that only exists when the sun is shining, marking the turning of the earth not with frantic ticking or loud, alarming bells, but with the slow, completely silent creeping of a shadow across the warm, weathered stone. Long before that tiny shadow has even begun to stretch across the dial, the deepest, most profoundly comforting sensory experience of the entire fortress has already been quietly unfolding in the dark. It does not announce itself with a sound, but rather with an incredibly rich, enveloping, and heavy fragrance rising slowly from the lower wards. This is the castle bakery. Built directly into the thickest, most fireproof walls of the vast kitchen complex were colossal, domed brick ovens. In the absolute stillness of the early dawn, while the courtyard is still bathed in blue twilight, bakers would pull the roaring, crackling wood fires from these deep brick caverns, leaving the stones radiating with an intense, deeply stored heat. They would then slide in enormous round loaves of hearty maslin bread, a rich, earthy, deeply nourishing mixture of rye and wheat. As the bread slowly baked, the magnificent, sweet, yeasty aroma would drift up the winding spiral staircases, infiltrating the cold stone corridors, while the massive brick ovens gently radiated a profound, ambient warmth that actually heated the floorboards of the rooms directly above. It represents the deep ancestral comfort of the hearth, a universal, timeless anchor of nourishment and safety that instantly calms the spirit and makes the vast fortress feel intimately like home. Let the imagined scent of that warm, baking bread ground you entirely in this peaceful moment. Your body grows beautifully heavy, sinking down into the softness beneath you, and your breath naturally settles into a slow, unforced rhythm, mirroring the quiet, steady rising of the dough. There is absolutely no urgency here, nothing you need to figure out, and nothing you need to hold on to. You can simply rest in the unfolding warmth of the narrative, perfectly supported, perfectly safe, perfectly. The profound domestic comfort of that morning warmth was not limited strictly to the hearth or the kitchen. It found its most luxurious, deeply sensory expression in the quietest, steam-filled chambers of the inner keep. Bathing in a grand medieval castle was never a hurried practical chore, but a prolonged, highly deliberate ritual of profound physical relaxation and aromatic therapy. Sunk slightly into the floor or resting on thick woven rugs was a massive wooden half-ton, a wide barrel meticulously crafted by master coopers and bound with iron hoops. To protect the skin from any rough splinters of the wood, the entire inside of the tub was beautifully draped with thick, impossibly soft, pure white linen cloth that billowed and floated beautifully in the water. The hot water itself, carried up in heavy wooden buckets, was frequently steeped in vast quantities of crushed calming botanicals, sweet chamomile, fresh woodruff, and deep crimson damask rose petals. A heavy temporary wooden canopy or a thick wool tent was often erected directly over the bath to trap the scented curling steam and block out the draught. Sinking into this linen-lined pool was a total sensory immersion, a sensation of absolute weightlessness that reflected a deep understanding that warm water and sweet herbs were essential, quiet medicine for a tired soul. Emerging from that deeply scented, humid warmth, wrapped securely in heavy dry linen and making your way slowly up the winding, shadowed stone staircases toward the private quarters, your feet naturally fall into a highly specific, uneven rhythm. If you pay close attention to the sweeping spiral stairs of a great keep, you will notice that the master stonemasons deliberately carved the steps with subtle, unpredictable variations in height and depth. This brilliant, subtle architectural feature is known simply as trip steps. While originally conceived as a clever defensive measure to disrupt the charging rhythm of an unfamiliar intruder rushing in the dark, the daily peaceful result is something entirely hypnotic. Because the steps are slightly uneven, with the centre worn into a smooth, shallow dip by centuries of soft leather shoes, you simply cannot run and you cannot rush. The architecture itself forces you to walk mindfully, keeping your eyes on your feet, feeling the exact specific placement of your soul against the cold stone with every single movement. It naturally and effortlessly anchors the mind entirely to the present moment, transforming a simple, mundane walk up a staircase into a slow, deliberate, incredibly grounding, moving meditation. At the very top of those mindful, curving stairs, you might step out into the bright, elevated air of the inner ward and discover a tiny, exquisitely carved stone pavilion standing completely alone, bathed in the midday light. This beautiful, open-air structure, completely devoid of heavy wooden doors, arrow slits or iron bars, was known wonderfully as the Gloriette. It was a highly specialised space dedicated entirely and exclusively to the pure, unadulterated enjoyment of peace. Surrounded by the intimidating, colossal machinery of defence and the harsh geometry of the battlements, the Gloriette was a fragile, beautiful paradox. A tiny palace built purely for sitting in the cool shade of the stone pillars, feeling the gentle brush of the summer breeze, tasting sweet honeyed wine, and listening to the delicate plucked notes of a lute spilling out over the courtyard. It is a profoundly moving realization that the people who built the most heavily fortified, unyielding, intimidating structures on Earth also recognize the absolute fundamental necessity of creating a dedicated, vulnerable space, purely for joy, actively and intentionally protecting the softness of the human heart right behind the heavy walls. Just as that small, beautiful pavilion rests safely in the very centre of the mighty fortress, your own mind can rest safely within the quiet centre of this night. You are completely sheltered from the demands of the day. Your thoughts can simply float like the notes of that distant lute, drifting lightly across your awareness, asking nothing, requiring no effort at all to understand. Everything is entirely, perfectly peaceful. From the elevated, breezy vantage point of that quiet pavilion, if the fortress happens to be perched on the edge of a great sweeping coastline, you might notice the castle walls themselves interacting with the ocean light in a miraculous, glittering way. The lime mortar holding these specific coastal fortresses together frequently hides a beautiful, shimmering secret. Millions upon millions of crushed oyster, scallop and cockle shells. Because traditional quarried limestone was often scarce near the sea, builders would gather mountains of discarded shells from the shoreline, accompanied by the crashing of the waves, and burn them in massive kilns to create their mortar. As a breathtaking, completely unintended consequence of this marine construction, thousands of tiny, unbroken fragments of pure mother-of-pearl remained permanently embedded in the hardened joints between the massive granite blocks. When the full moon rises over the dark, rolling ocean and strikes the side of the fortress, the entire castle faintly glitters and shines with a soft, pearlescent glow. The building ceases to be merely a heavy structure sitting on the land, seamlessly becoming an organic, beautiful extension of the sea itself, proudly wearing the ocean's discarded jewels in a permanent, shimmering nocturnal mosaic. Far beyond those shimmering, salt-kissed walls, stretching out into the deeply protected, sun-drenched valleys of the lower estate, lies the sprawling castle orchard, a place governed by an entirely different, incredibly slow and majestic measurement of time. Here, among the neatly planted rows of fruit trees, the quiet orchard keeper practiced the delicate, almost magical botanical art of grafting. With incredibly steady hands and absolute focus, they would take a tiny, fragile branch from a sweet, highly prized pear tree, the scion, and carefully bind it directly into the split trunk of a hardy, deep-rooted, wild quince tree. They sealed the delicate, open union tightly with wet, cool river clay and wrapped it gently in soft strips of linen, perfectly mimicking the careful bandaging of a wound. And then they simply walked away and waited. They waited for years, allowing the snows to fall and the spring rains to wash over the dormant wood, trusting the sap to slowly rise, trusting the two distinct woods to miraculously knit together and become a single, living organism. It is the ultimate quiet expression of hope and profound patience, investing meticulous, gentle care into a tiny branch that will eventually yield magnificent, heavy fruit for a generation yet unborn. That profound, beautiful patience, the quiet willingness to let the years slowly, inevitably unfold among the trees, was perfectly mirrored indoors by the most hypnotic way the medieval world measured a passing hour. Resting heavily on the dark oak desk of the scholar's quiet study, catching the slanting golden light of the late afternoon, was the sand glass. But these elegant hand-blown glass bulbs, with their beautifully imperfect wavy surfaces and tiny trapped air bubbles, were rarely filled with coarse, common beach sand. To ensure a perfectly smooth, uninterrupted, frictionless flow, they were frequently filled with finely pulverized marble dust, or sometimes the shells of eggs that had been roasted, crushed, and sifted through fine silk over and over again until they felt like water. Sitting in the quiet study and watching that incredibly fine, pale dust slip silently and continuously through the narrow glass neck to form a perfect, slowly growing mountain in the lower bulb is a deeply mesmerizing experience. It is the physical manifestation of time made completely visible, soft and utterly silent, gently teaching the observer to watch the passing moments with absolute grace, without the anxiety of a ticking hand, just a continuous, yielding, deeply peaceful flow. When the very last grain of that pale marble dust silently slips into the lower glass, signalling the true arrival of the deep twilight, the final, most deeply comforting ritual of the castle evening finally begins. One by one, moving slowly down the echoing stone corridors, the heavy, solid oak shutters on the inside of the thick stone windows are pulled firmly shut. These are not flimsy decorative screens, but massive, thick boards of aged timber, heavy with iron studs designed to perfectly seal the deep window embrasure. As each shutter is closed, a heavy, hand-forged iron latch is dropped horizontally into its cold metal bracket. The sound it makes is a deep, resonant, highly satisfying metallic clack. With that single, definitive sound, the vastness of the dark, the howling of the wind, and the infinite, intimidating expanse of the night sky are entirely banished from the room. The flickering candlelight suddenly feels incredibly warm and close. The space is instantly transformed into an absolute, impenetrable cocoon of warmth, safety, and profound silence, closing the heavy wooden eyes of the castle to the outside world and creating an unbroken boundary of comfort that perfectly wraps the mind in an invitation to sleep. Even with those heavy wooden shutters drawn tight against the sprawling vastness of the night, the interior of the most luxurious private chambers was rarely left as bare, cold stone. To create an atmosphere of profound, enveloping warmth, master artisans would often wrap the walls entirely in a magnificent creation known as cuir de cordoue, or gilded leather. Entire calf skins were meticulously soaked, tanned, and stamped with heavy wooden blocks to create deep, incredibly intricate, repeating botanical reliefs. These textured surfaces were then painstakingly covered in delicate sheets of pure silver leaf and coated with a thick, warm, amber-coloured resin, which miraculously transformed the silver into a glowing, luminescent gold. When the massive room was lit only by the flickering low light of the evening hearth, the embossed leather walls seemed to softly catch fire, shimmering and reflecting the warmth back into the centre of the room. More than just a visual marvel, this heavy continuous layer of thick leather acted as a brilliant natural acoustic dampener and a dense thermal blanket. The room became permanently infused with a deeply grounding, incredibly rich fragrance, a slow, comforting blend of cured leather, natural oils, and the sweet beeswax used to polish the beautiful golden vines. Down near the fragrant floorboards, where the heavy velvet drapes pool softly against the stone, a much smaller, highly deliberate architectural detail reveals the castle's quietest inhabitant. If you were to examine the base of the massive iron-studded oak doors leading into the great halls or the granaries, you would frequently find a single, perfectly smooth small archway, neatly carved directly through the ancient wood. This was the castle's cat hole, a permanent open invitation for the fortress's revered velvet-pawed guardians. In a sprawling world heavily dependent on the absolute preservation of stored wheat, oats, and barley, the castle cat was not merely a pet, but a highly respected, vitally essential member of the estate. These small, meticulously crafted doorways allowed the cats to move completely silently, fluidly, and independently through the vast, locked labyrinth of the fortress at all hours of the day and night. There is a profound, beautiful comfort in knowing that while heavily armoured sentries slowly walked the high, freezing, wind-swept battlements above, a much softer, perfectly silent sentinel was quietly patrolling the warm, firelit corridors below, occasionally stopping to curl into a perfectly round, sleeping crescent on a warm hearthstone. If you were to follow that silent, velvet-footed shadow deeper into the heart of the estate, you would eventually reach a heavy door with a complex lock, guarding a room that held treasures far more delicate than gold. This was the spicery. Distinct entirely from the bustling kitchens or the damp subterranean root cellars, the spicery was a dry, highly secure, deeply aromatic vault managed exclusively by the castle's chief clerk. Inside this quiet room, hundreds of small, beautifully woven baskets, smooth ceramic jars, and lockable wooden caskets held the staggering, fragrant wealth of the known world. Whole nutmegs waiting to be grated, long curled quills of Sri Lankan cinnamon, intensely fragrant cloves, and delicate threads of crimson saffron were carefully weighed on tiny, perfect brass scales. Because these ingredients had travelled across vast oceans and endless, slow-moving caravan routes, they were treated with a quiet, absolute reverence. The air trapped within this small, windowless room was permanently thick with an intoxicating, heavy, incredibly relaxing perfume. Simply standing near the heavy oak door of the spicery, breathing in the warm, spicy, woodsy aroma drifting through the cracks, was enough to instantly soothe the nervous system and wrap the mind in a deep, exotic blanket of comfort. Let that warm, spiced air settle deeply into your chest. The breath moves in, carrying the scent of 100 distant shores, and moves out, releasing the heavy burdens of the day. The body continues its slow, inevitable descent into perfect rest. There is nothing to guard, nothing to weigh, and absolutely nothing you need to hold on to. Moving away from the centre of the keep and back toward the immense defensive outer walls, you can find a space specifically designed for quiet, solitary reflection. Carved directly into the immensely thick splayed archways of the tallest stone windows were two perfectly flat, opposing stone benches known simply as window seats. By creating this deep, sheltered hollow right inside the thickness of the defensive wall, architects created a magnificent tiny room within a room. This was the absolute perfect place to sit quietly during the long, slow hours of the late afternoon. Wrapped securely in a heavy woolen cloak, a reader could lean comfortably against the cool stone and rely entirely on the natural fading daylight pouring gently through the glass to read a small leather-bound manuscript or practice fine embroidery. It is a profoundly comforting, deeply intimate micro-architecture. Sitting inside that deep stone pocket with the vast echoing cavern of the Great Hall safely behind you and the sweeping, quiet landscape of the world stretching out endlessly before you, creates a physical sensation of being securely held, cradled directly within the unyielding strength of the ancient stone. While sitting safely in that thick, protective stone pocket, you might hear the weather outside begin to gently, softly shift. As a rolling, rhythmic autumn rain begins to fall across the high roofs, the true mesmerising function of the castle's gargoyles is beautifully revealed. Often misunderstood today as mere frightening, grotesque decorations, these masterfully carved stone creatures were actually highly engineered, absolutely vital water chutes. If heavy rainwater were allowed to simply cascade down the side of the building, it would eventually wash away the lime mortar and destroy the ancient masonry. Instead, the gargoyles were deliberately designed to project far out into the empty air, catching the heavy torrents of rain from the lead gutters and throwing the water completely clear of the walls in wide, sweeping, graceful arcs. During a heavy downpour, the fortress is instantly surrounded by a magnificent, chaotic symphony of dozens of small, arching waterfalls splashing heavily into the deep moat below. This functional plumbing creates a massive, continuous, completely enveloping curtain of acoustic white noise. The roaring, splashing, watery hum beautifully masks the howling of the wind and naturally, effortlessly lulls the inhabitants of the keep into a state of deep, uninterrupted sleep. Inside, protected from the rain, and listening to that continuous soothing rush of water, the flickering candlelight occasionally catches the massive, sprawling tapestries hanging quietly on the walls. If you look closely at these ancient, woven masterpieces, you're actually witnessing a beautiful, slow-motion transformation orchestrated entirely by the gentle hand of time. When they were first created on the massive wooden looms, these tapestries were a riot of incredibly bright, vibrant colours. But because the organic yellow and red dyes traditionally crafted from wildflowers and crushed madder root are inherently fragile, they slowly, inevitably succumb to the gentle bleaching of centuries of ambient light. However, the deep, rich indigo blue dye, derived from the hardy woad plant, is miraculously stable and stubbornly colour-fast. Over the span of hundreds of years, the bright, sunny, vibrant spring meadows originally woven by the artist gently fade away, leaving only the magnificent, enduring shades of blue and deep green. The landscape of the tapestry slowly, beautifully ages into a permanent, deeply peaceful midnight twilight. It is a quiet, visual poetry, the woven world naturally dimming its own lights, slowly transitioning from the bright energy of the morning into the quiet, enduring blue stillness of the night. You can feel your own thoughts following that exact same graceful fading path. The bright, vivid, demanding colours of the waking world are gently washing away, leaving only a soft, cool, beautiful blue twilight in the mind. The transition is completely effortless. You're simply fading, beautifully and naturally into the quiet dark. When the soft, rhythmic rain finally passes and the morning sun returns to warm the wet earth, the lower gardens offer a radically different kind of quiet meditation. Set apart from the fragrant rose beds and the productive herb plots, you might find a massive, intricate pattern cut directly into the short, fragrant grass, the turf labyrinth. Unlike a traditional maze, which is intentionally designed with high hedges, confusing dead ends and frustrating traps meant to trick the mind, a turf labyrinth is entirely flat and features only one single, beautifully winding path that inevitably leads directly to the centre. It was created as a tool for profound walking meditation, an ancient physical prayer. Following the winding, twisting, slowly circling path requires absolutely no difficult choices and no complex navigation. You simply put one foot in front of the other, smelling the rich scent of the damp, crushed grass, allowing the hypnotic, repetitive, sweeping physical motion to gently untangle the chaotic knots of a busy mind. Walking the labyrinth was a guaranteed, predictable journey to a quiet centre, a physical reassurance that even when the path seems to wind endlessly back and forth, you are always, inevitably, moving toward a place of absolute peace. At the very centre of that winding, meditative path, or sometimes standing proudly in the exact middle of the main cobblestone courtyard, was the true, living heart of the castle, the great linden tree. Many sprawling fortresses were deliberately and carefully built around a pre-existing, magnificent ancient tree, preserving it as a vital organic anchor amidst the heavy sea of grey stone. The linden, with its beautiful heart-shaped leaves, was universally associated with grace, peace, and quiet gathering. When the massive canopy finally blooms in the early warm days of summer, its thousands of tiny pale yellow flowers release an intoxicating, deeply relaxing, honey-sweet perfume that completely saturates the courtyard air. The tree serves as a monumental living sundial, casting a massive, slowly shifting pool of deep, cool shade across the hot cobblestones. The sound of a gentle breeze rustling through the millions of leaves creates a soft, natural, sweeping metronome, a living, breathing lung in the very centre of the military architecture. It stands as a profound reminder that long before the first stone block was ever quarried, and long after the walls eventually crumble, the deep roots of the earth remain exactly where they belong, completely unbothered by the passing of human time. Following the dark, ancient roots of that great linden tree beneath the outer curtain wall, you might discover a deeply concealed, beautifully unassuming exit known as the postern gate. Hidden far away from the massive, intimidating main gatehouse with its heavy iron portcullis and shouting guards, the postern was a tiny, narrow wooden door, completely obscured by thick, cascading curtains of dark green ivy and wild climbing roses. It was a secret, secondary threshold designed for quiet, unobserved movement. But beyond its obvious tactical use, the postern gate served as a vital, psychological release valve for the inhabitants of the castle. It was a completely private, magical doorway that allowed someone to step away from the rigid, formal, incredibly structured life of the court, slip unnoticed through the heavy stone armour, and disappear directly into the wild, rustling, untamed embrace of the surrounding forest. The very existence of this tiny hidden door provides a deep, comforting sense of freedom. The quiet, secret knowledge that no matter how thick, heavy, or permanent the walls of a situation might seem, there is always a small hidden way out into the open, breathing woods. Returning quietly through that small, ivy-draped door as the deepest, heaviest hour of the night finally takes hold, the ultimate, most profoundly comforting ritual of the medieval evening begins. Before the castle can fully surrender to sleep, the massive roaring hearth fires must be safely managed. This ancient essential practice is known as the couvre-feu, the poetic origin of the modern word curfew, literally translating to cover the fire. Using a heavy iron rake, or sometimes a beautiful dome-shaped piece of pierced copper, the last person awake would carefully, methodically pull a thick, heavy blanket of soft grey wood ash completely over the glowing red embers of the fire. This brilliant technique starved the flames of just enough oxygen to stop them from dangerously burning, putting the fire into a deep, suspended, completely safe sleep. Yet, beneath that soft, powdery grey blanket, the intensely hot, glowing core of the fire remained perfectly insulated and alive, quietly dreaming in the dark, preserving its vital heat all through the freezing night so it could be instantly coaxed back to life with a single breath in the morning. It is the absolute, perfect metaphor for a restful night, covering the bright, burning energy of the day with a soft, quiet blanket of ash, allowing the core to rest safely and warmly in the dark, patiently waiting for the dawn. And when that pale silver light finally crests the eastern towers, lifting the heavy veil of the night, it awakens a quiet, profoundly fragrant industry just beyond the castle walls. Long before the bustling courtyards fully stir, the castle laundresses would carry massive woven willow baskets of damp, freshly washed linens down to the lower meadows. But they did not simply hang these heavy fabrics on rigid wooden lines. In a brilliant, beautifully aromatic practice, they utilised sprawling bleaching greens, completely covered in low, dense, cultivated bushes of wild rosemary and sweet lavender. The heavy, wet sheets of pure linen and hemp were laid directly over the living plants. As the morning sun slowly warmed the earth, it naturally and gently bleached the white fabrics to a brilliant, glowing purity. Simultaneously, the crushing weight of the wet linen against the sun-warmed herbs forced the plants to release their natural, deeply calming essential oils directly into the very weave of the cloth. When those sheets were finally gathered at dusk, completely dry and remarkably crisp, they carried the permanent sun-baked perfume of the summer meadow straight into the enclosed stone-walled bedchambers, wrapping the sleeping inhabitants in a vast, fragrant cocoon of absolute botanical serenity. Following the memory of that sweet, clean scent back toward the immense warmth of the castle's lower culinary complex, you might notice an entirely different, incredibly inviting aroma drifting from a small, highly specialised annex. Separated completely from the roaring, greasy heat of the massive roasting spits and the heavy bread ovens, there existed a delicate, quiet room known specifically as the wafery. This was a dedicated architectural space designed entirely for the creation of oublis, incredibly thin, fragile, spiced wafers that were a highly prized delicacy. The master waferer would pour a delicate liquid batter heavily laced with rose water, ground anise, and sweet honey onto heavy, long-handled iron tongs. But these were no ordinary kitchen tools. The heavy iron plates were meticulously engraved by master blacksmiths in reverse, featuring incredibly intricate crests, blooming flowers, or complex geometric knots. When the tongs were squeezed tightly shut and held over the glowing red embers of a charcoal brazier, the batter would hiss softly, instantly baking into a perfectly crisp, beautifully embossed work of edible art. Standing in the quiet warmth of the wafery, listening to the gentle rhythmic sizzle of the iron, and breathing in the intoxicating warm scent of toasted honey and spice, is a deeply grounding experience, revealing a world that dedicated entire rooms and extraordinary craftsmanship simply to the pursuit of a fleeting, sweet moment of joy. Your breathing can naturally align with that slow, steady, rhythmic pressing of the warm iron. The chest rises and falls with a deeply comforting predictability. There is absolutely no rush. The body is simply absorbing the warmth of these ancient spaces, settling heavier and deeper into a state of total, unwavering calm, entirely supported by the quiet weight of history. That profound sense of deliberately cultivated stillness was not limited to the warm kitchens. It was expertly applied to the wildest, most untamed inhabitants of the estate. Tucked away in the cool, shaded northern courtyards was the mews, the dedicated sanctuary for the Lord's magnificent birds of prey. Inside this hushed, beautifully kept building, sitting on padded wooden perches, were the surfalcons and peregrines, creatures of absolute, fierce, chaotic energy. Yet, the atmosphere inside the mews was one of profound, unbelievable tranquility, achieved through a masterpiece of sensory engineering, the leather falcon's hood, hand-stitched from the softest, most supple calf skin, and often topped with a delicate tuft of heron feathers. The hood was gently slipped over the bird's head, immediately plunging it into absolute velvety darkness. By instantly removing the overwhelming, chaotic visual stimuli of the bright world, the hood triggered a natural, incredibly deep biological reflex in the falcon. Its rapidly beating heart would instantly slow, its sharp, frantic movements would entirely cease, and it would enter a state of profound, meditative rest. It is a stunning physical representation of how the simple, deliberate introduction of soft darkness can instantly tame the wildest of anxieties, providing a portable, deeply comforting night that brings immediate peace to an overactive mind. Stepping out from the quiet shadows of the mews and walking toward the great echoing archway of the main gatehouse reveals another breathtaking example of heavy, intimidating power, beautifully tamed by elegant control. Suspended over the deep, glassy water of the moat is the massive oak-planked drawbridge. While it appears to be an impossibly heavy, immovable object requiring dozens of straining men to lift, the reality of its movement was often completely silent, deeply graceful, and required almost no effort at all. This was due to the hidden, magnificent physics of the counterpoise beams. High above the gate arch, massive horizontal wooden arms stretched backward into the gatehouse, perfectly weighted on their hidden ends with tons of heavy lead or dense stone blocks. These hidden weights were meticulously calculated to perfectly balance the exact, staggering weight of the bridge outside. Because the system rested in a state of absolute mathematical equilibrium, a single guard pulling gently on a hand-forged iron chain could seamlessly tip the balance. The colossal, ancient timbers of the bridge would rise up into the air smoothly and silently, floating upward as if completely weightless. It is a mesmerizing, deeply soothing visual, the heaviest, most impenetrable barriers of the medieval world gracefully yielding to the gentle, invisible laws of perfect balance. When that massive wooden bridge is finally lowered to greet the soft, fading light of the early evening, it provides a secure pathway out into the sprawling, manicured lower gardens. As the deep twilight settles over the landscape and the vibrant colours of the roses and lilies fade into uniform grey shadows, the specific paths weaving through the garden begin to reveal a brilliant hidden luminescence. Rather than using dark, heavy cobblestones or muddy gravel, the winding walkways of the finest pleasure gardens were frequently paved with thousands of crushed, naturally bleached oyster and clam shells. Harvested from the distant, crashing coastlines and laid thickly into the soft earth, these delicate fragments held a remarkable, glowing secret. Because the pure white calcium carbonate of the shells possesses an incredibly high albedo, it acts like a sponge for ambient light. Long after the sun has completely vanished, these winding, pearlescent pathways catch the absolute faintest, ambient light of the stars and the rising silver moon, glowing softly against the dark, manicured lawns. Walking these paths in the dead of night produces a soft, rhythmic, deeply satisfying crunch underfoot, while the ground itself gently guides your way with a soft, bioluminescent-like glow. It is an architecture of profound safety and subtle beauty, proving that even in the darkest hours, a carefully laid path will always provide its own gentle, guiding light. You can let your mind slowly follow that glowing, winding path into the quiet dark. There is no need to carry a torch or search for a destination. The path is already illuminated, the ground is completely secure, and you're entirely free to just wander, letting the gentle, rhythmic crunch of your own slow footsteps lull you deeper and deeper into a state of absolute peace if you were to follow that softly glowing path back inside, moving away from the massive echoing stone of the outer walls and stepping into the more intimate timber-framed living quarters of the inner bailey. Your hands might brush against a radically different kind of structural surface. Dividing the smaller private chambers were walls constructed entirely of ancient wattle and daub. This was an incredibly tactile, deeply earthy method of building that relied on the supreme flexibility of the forest. Master weavers would harvest hundreds of long, pliant green hazel branches, weaving them tightly together exactly like a giant vertical basket. This wooden skeleton was then thickly smeared with a heavy, smooth mixture of rich clay, earth, and binding straw. When it slowly dried, it created a wonderfully organic, matte surface that was distinctly warm to the touch, entirely unlike the freezing, unyielding granite of the exterior. More importantly, these thick, earthy, woven partitions were magnificent, natural acoustic dampeners. They greedily absorbed the sharp echoes of footsteps, the clattering of metal, and the howling of the wind, wrapping the interior rooms in a heavy, muffled, completely insulated quiet. It transformed the interior of the fortress into a series of soft, interconnected, earthy cells, naturally grounding the intimidating scale of the castle in the simple, comforting materials of the forest floor. Deep within that quiet, insulated maze of wattle and daub walls, heavily guarded behind thick iron grates and a door possessing 3 distinct heavy locks, was the most profoundly silent, deeply respected room in the entire estate, the muniment room. In an era when a single drop of water or a stray spark could erase generations of human history, this room was a dedicated, dry vault built specifically for the eternal preservation of memory. It contained absolutely no gold, no silver, and no jewels. Instead, the heavy cedar-lined chests were filled with thousands of tightly rolled parchment charters, land deeds, and intricately illuminated royal decrees. The atmosphere inside the muniment room was perfectly still and exceptionally dry, possessing a rich, incredibly complex and deeply calming fragrance. It smelled of ancient cured vellum, the sharp oaky tang of iron gall ink, and the sweet heavy scent of the massive dark red beeswax seals that bound the documents shut. Standing quietly in this small windowless space is like standing perfectly still in the very centre of an hourglass. It is a room where the frantic, messy, chaotic passage of human time has been deliberately captured, rolled tightly, and safely put to rest, offering a profound sense of permanence and an absolute assurance that the past is safely, securely held. Moving directly away from that dry, formal, heavily locked archive of the past, we find a stunning architectural contrast dedicated entirely to the soft, living, breathing present. Situated high in the sunniest, most deeply protected southern towers was the bower, traditionally serving as the private, exclusive retreat for the women of the noble household. The bower was a deliberate, magnificent rejection of the castle's military harshness. The rough grey stone walls were entirely completely obscured by thick, overlapping layers of intensely colourful, embroidered silk hangings that rippled softly in the warm-up drafts. The cold, unyielding floors were thickly covered with imported hand-knotted woolen carpets from the Levant, so deep and soft that footsteps were entirely erased. Heavy, imposing oak chairs were replaced by low, incredibly plush floor cushions covered in crushed velvet. In the bright, warm afternoon light pouring through the wide windows, the bower was a sanctuary filled with the soft, melodic plucking of a wire-strung psaltery and the quiet, rhythmic murmuring of intimate conversation. It stands as a beautiful, enduring testament to the human spirit's absolute necessity to actively carve out spaces of supreme softness, vulnerability, and gentle beauty, even when completely surrounded by a world defined by heavy iron and unyielding stone. Just as the thick draped silks of the bower completely soften the sharp echoes of the fortress, the heavy quiet air of the night is now softening the sharp thoughts of your day. Every breath you take pulls that gentle, silencing softness deeper into your mind, wrapping your awareness in a protective, comforting layer of pure calm. The body yields entirely to the mattress, deeply trusting the quiet peace of the night. As the deep chill of that night finally begins to seep through the massive exterior walls, the preparation of the heavy velvet-draped beds becomes a meticulous, highly comforting art form. Before the inhabitants would ever dream of slipping between the freezing, crisp linen sheets, servants would perform a brilliant, mobile ritual of fire and brass. Using a long-handled, beautifully polished brass warming pan, a shallow, perfectly round metal chamber with a pierced, highly decorative lid, they would carefully scoop a small pile of intensely glowing red-hot hardwood embers directly from the main hearth. This contained, radiant little sun was then slipped smoothly between the cold sheets, continuously and gently glided back and forth across the entire expanse of the bed. The hot brass instantly banished the damp, freezing air trapped in the linen. When the pan was finally removed, it left behind an absolutely magical, deeply inviting environment. Slipping into the bed was not a shock to the system, but an immediate full-body immersion into a vast, radiant, pre-warmed cocoon. The sheets carried a faint, incredibly comforting, slightly toasted scent of hot, clean linen and sweet wood smoke. It is the ultimate expression of ancient, ingenious comfort, a heavy, unyielding defense against the cold that instantly, perfectly relaxes every single muscle in the body, signaling that the daily battle against the elements is officially over. In the deepest, most absolutely silent hours of the night, long after those warm beds have been filled and the great fires have been banked under heavy layers of ash, a final, solitary journey sometimes unfolds in the dark. For the lord of the castle or the dedicated resident monks, the architecture provided a deeply personal hidden pathway known as the night stairs. These were narrow, beautifully worn stone steps that led directly from the absolute privacy of the bedchamber straight down into the upper shadowed galleries of the castle chapel. They were designed to be navigated in the dead of night, illuminated by nothing more than the tiny trembling flame of a single hand-held beeswax taper. Walking slowly down these quiet, spiralling steps at 3 a.m. is an experience of profound, enveloping solitude. The vast, echoing cavern of the empty chapel below is totally silent, bathed only in the pale, ethereal silver light of the moon streaming perfectly through the high, arched windows. Sitting entirely alone in that massive, cool, moonlit space, surrounded by the sleeping weight of the entire fortress, provides an overwhelming, breathtaking sense of peace. It is an architecture built specifically to accommodate the quietest, most vulnerable moments of the human soul, a private bridge between the warmth of the sleeping body and the vast, infinite, beautiful silence of the universe. And as the last faint echo of a footstep fades entirely into the cool stone of the night stairs, the entire fortress seems to collectively exhale, perfectly suspended in the deep, unwavering ocean of the night, as we drift further still into the quiet, hidden marvels that exist high above the heavy stone hearths, where the smoke from the evening fires begins its slow, graceful ascent. Long before the invention of the towering, wall-embedded chimneys that we associate with later centuries, the earliest great halls were warmed by a massive central open hearth. The fragrant wood smoke would rise directly up into the cavernous vaulted rafters of the ceiling, but it did not simply pool there to cloud the room. It escaped softly through a magnificent architectural feature known as the louver. Sitting astride the very peak of the roof ridge, the louver was an elaborate, beautifully crafted wooden lantern. Built like a delicate, airy crown of overlapping, slanted wooden slats, it was ingeniously designed to allow the rising smoke to drift out freely into the night sky, while completely preventing the heavy rains or swirling snows from entering the hall below. The ancient, seasoned oak timbers of the rafters, bathed night after night in this sweet, curing wood smoke, were naturally preserved and blackened by the centuries. The louver acted as a silent, beautifully calibrated lung for the building, catching the high, sweeping winds of the roofline and drawing the air upward in a continuous, quiet sigh, allowing the massive stone fortress to breathe effortlessly while the inhabitants slept in the warmth below. This profound concept of breathing space, of creating a deliberate buffer between the interior warmth and the harshness of the outside elements, extended to the very footprint of the most advanced fortresses. If you were to look down from the clouds, you would see the mesmerizing geometric perfection of the concentric castle. Rather than relying on a single massive wall, architects designed walls within walls, like dropping a heavy stone into a still pond and watching the perfect circular rings ripple outward. A concentric castle is that exact ripple effect permanently frozen in heavy stone and deep earth. The soaring, imposing inner ward is surrounded completely by a wide, open corridor of grass, which is in turn ringed by a slightly lower, heavily fortified outer wall. This nested, layered architecture creates a profound sense of psychological distance from the outside world. It is the ultimate, monumental version of a Russian nesting doll. To sit quietly in the very centre of the inner courtyard is to know that massive, unbroken layers of deep defence are wrapped around you in absolute protective silence, actively keeping the chaos of the world at bay. Just as those ancient heavy walls wrap protectively around the centre of the estate, your own sense of calm is gently wrapping around you right now. The outside world is safely separated by thick, quiet layers of time. You are securely held in the innermost ring of this peaceful moment. The breath settles effortlessly, moving slow and deep, requiring absolutely no direction. Within that secure innermost ring, before delicate flat glass was widely available or affordable for every structure, the smaller, more intimate windows of the timber-framed halls were shielded against the sharp winds by a remarkably organic, beautifully unexpected material. Master artisans would take ordinary animal horn, soak it patiently in pure water for weeks until it became incredibly soft and pliable, and then press it flat into miraculously thin, translucent sheets. When these delicate panes of polished horn were carefully set into the heavy, dark wooden window frames, they did not allow for a clear, sharp view of the outside courtyard. Instead, they captured the harsh, direct, brilliant sunlight of the midday and completely transformed it. The horn filtered the harsh rays, bathing the interior rooms in a continuous soft honey amber glow. Sitting in a quiet room illuminated through polished horn felt exactly like being suspended inside a perfect drop of warm golden sap. It blurred the sharp, chaotic edges of the waking day into a hazy, peaceful, permanent twilight, wrapping the mind in a warm visual softness that instantly calmed the eyes. Drifting slowly down from those golden-lit, timber-framed rooms, far beneath the heavy wooden floorboards and the bustling life of the courtyards, you eventually reach the very roots of the great keep, the Undercroft. This was a sweeping, cavernous, subterranean storage space, but it was nothing like a dark, frightening dungeon. It was an architectural marvel of sweeping, ribbed stone vaults that sprang upward from massive, solid central pillars, looking remarkably like a petrified underground forest of pale limestone. The air down in the Undercroft was permanently cool, heavy and wonderfully motionless. Because the room was sunk deep into the earth, wrapped in the planet's own immense thermal mass, it held a perfectly constant, unwavering temperature through the freezing snows of winter and the sweltering heat of August. It acted as a giant stone-lined cellar for resting massive tons of wine and towering fragrant stacks of golden grain. The acoustics in this subterranean sanctuary were incredibly soft and resonant. A single footstep would hum low and sweet, like a long note played slowly on a deep cello, returning a profound, echoing stillness that feels like resting in the quietest, safest place on earth. The profound stillness of that vaulted undercroft was sometimes accompanied by the faintest, almost imperceptible, highly musical sound of moving water. This was not the chaotic dripping of a leak, but the miraculous, completely hidden circulatory system of the castle. Long before the advent of modern plumbing or iron pipes, brilliant medieval engineers brought fresh, sweet running spring water from distant elevated hills directly into the heart of the fortress, using invisible networks of hollowed-out elm tree trunks. Elmwood possesses a unique, almost magical botanical property. When it is kept permanently wet and buried deep in the dark, oxygen-starved earth, it simply does not rot. Instead, it slowly hardens until it is nearly as dense and unyielding as iron. Miles of these silent wooden pipes ran seamlessly beneath the sprawling summer meadows, diving under the deep, dark water of the moat to deliver a continuous, rhythmic, deeply soothing flow of pure water to the bronze spouts of the inner courtyard. The massive stone castle was secretly, quietly drinking from the distant green hills through a vast subterranean, invisible forest of wooden veins. Allow yourself to simply follow the path of that quiet underground water, moving effortlessly and smoothly through the dark, finding its way forward without any struggle at all. Your mind can just drift along that exact same smooth liquid path. There is absolutely no need to force a single thought to the surface. Just let the gentle, unseen current carry you further down into rest. When that pure, sweet spring water was finally drawn in heavy wooden buckets and brought into the lower dining halls for the evening meal, the acoustic environment of the room was remarkably, surprisingly muted. In an age where we frequently imagine the constant, sharp, chaotic clatter of metal goblets and glass plates, the actual reality for the vast majority of the castle's inhabitants was the gentle use of treen. Treen was beautiful, humble tableware carved entirely from solid single pieces of well-seasoned ash, sycamore and pale maple wood. There were deep, wide wooden trenchers, perfectly smooth wooden spoons worn soft by the hands of generations, and beautifully turned wooden drinking bowls. When hundreds of people sat together at the long trestle tables to eat using treen, it did not create a harsh, echoing din. Instead, it produced a soft, rhythmic, hollow, deeply organic murmuring sound, wood softly tapping against wood. It was a domestic, heartbeat-like acoustic that miraculously turned a crowded, echoing stone hall into a surprisingly calm, deeply grounding sensory environment, filled only with the soft sounds of sustenance and quiet conversation. Stepping directly outside that warm, softly echoing dining hall into the cool air of the Bailey, your hand might lightly brush against the exterior walls of the timber frame lodgings, revealing an incredibly unexpected, beautiful texture. Instead of rough, bare clay or flat, uniform stone, the thick plaster packed between the dark, heavy oak beams was frequently sculpted into a magnificent decorative art form known as pargeting. While the earthy plaster was still damp, cool, and highly yielding, master craftsmen would use deeply carved wooden stamps, and sometimes simply the gentle pressure of their own bare hands, to press intricate, repeating patterns directly into the soft walls. Sweeping, interlocking vines, perfectly blooming Tudor roses, and graceful leaping stags were modelled in high relief. As the sun slowly moved across the sky over the course of the long afternoon, these raised, textured murals caught the shifting light, creating a slow-moving, completely mesmerising canvas of soft, travelling shadows. It is a beautiful testament to a mindset where even the most basic, functional act of weatherproofing a wall was treated as a vital opportunity to carve permanent, beautiful, highly tactile art directly into the very fabric of the home. High above the stamped plaster vines of the courtyard, hidden away in a completely enclosed, dusty, heavily timbered chamber, situated directly over the massive arch of the main gatehouse, sat the great machine responsible for the castle's ultimate unyielding safety, the windlass. This was an enormous, deeply greased horizontal wooden drum wrapped tightly in incredibly thick, fragrant hempen ropes attached directly to the impossibly heavy iron portcullis suspended in the tunnel below. What is so profoundly calming about this massive machine is the sheer, silent brilliance of its mechanical advantage. The immense wooden wheel was so perfectly, meticulously balanced, with smooth, interlocking wooden cogs and heavy, unseen stone counterweights, that a single, solitary guard slowly turning a smooth wooden handle in the dead of the night could lift or lower tons of solid iron and hardened oak. The great machine did all of the heavy, staggering lifting in absolute, complete silence. It is a mesmerizing, deeply comforting reminder of how intelligent, careful design can effortlessly and smoothly carry immense burdens that would otherwise seem completely impossible to move. You do not need to carry your own heavy burdens through the vastness of this night. Let the invisible, quiet mechanics of the dark do all the heavy lifting for you. The body naturally sinks a little lower, the thoughts lighten and fade, and everything heavy is simply handed over to the enduring, quiet strength of the stone beneath you. In the brightest, most expansive, sun-drenched rooms of the upper keep, another kind of wooden machinery created a very different, highly rhythmic, deeply peaceful pulse. The creation of the massive, breathtaking tapestries that insulated the cold walls was not always done in distant, unseen workshops. Frequently, towering, portable wooden looms were erected directly inside the castle chambers themselves. The master weavers would sit at these massive vertical frames for hours at a time, completely absorbed in their work. The process of weaving was a deeply hypnotic, repetitive physical dance. The heavy, polished wooden shuttle, carrying spools of incredibly rich indigo blue and deep forest green yarn, was thrown smoothly back and forth through the tightly stretched warp threads. Clack, swish, clack, swish. The steady, unhurried, metronome-like sound of the heavy wooden loom gently filled the stone room from the early dawn until the fading of the dusk. It was the beautiful rhythmic sound of time being deliberately, carefully slowed down and woven into something permanent, tactile, and profoundly warm. A slow heartbeat of creation echoing softly against the castle walls. To slowly walk over and look out from the high, splayed stone windows where those finished tapestries eventually hung, you might see a vast landscape that had been dramatically, beautifully altered to create a sense of absolute, unparalleled isolation. In many grand, sprawling estates, the natural winding streams of the valley were deliberately and carefully dammed to flood the surrounding low-lying meadows, creating vast, shallow, man-made castle lakes. These immense, expansive bodies of water were far more than simple defensive moats. They were sweeping architectural features designed to turn the towering fortress into a solitary, majestic, floating island of pale stone. On a completely still, windless morning, the massive lake became a flawless, panoramic, unbroken mirror, perfectly and silently reflecting the towering battlements, the passing white clouds, and the deep blue of the sky. The sheer volume of the water completely swallowed the harsh sounds of the distant, bustling villages and the clatter of the far-off roads, wrapping the entire castle in a vast, profound perimeter of absolute watery silence. And as the last light of the sun slips quietly beneath the glassy surface of that infinite reflecting water, the shadows of the castle stretch long and soft across the lake, pointing the way toward the deepest, most tranquil mysteries that still lie waiting in the dark. Drifting inward from the vast moonlit reflections of that quiet lake, past the heavy outer defences and the sleeping courtyards, the architecture of the deep interior reveals a profound, almost breathtaking sensitivity to personal solitude. Built deep into the thick, dividing masonry of the private stone chapels were tiny, brilliantly engineered diagonal channels known as hagioscopes, or more simply, squints. These were not windows designed to let in the sweeping bright light of the day, but incredibly narrow, highly specific, angled tunnels carved directly through the solid rock. They were meticulously aligned to offer a single, unbroken line of sight to the main altar from a completely separate, adjacent, often deeply shadowed room. For a lord or lady who sought the absolute enveloping quiet of solitary reflection, the hagioscope allowed them to witness the flickering candlelight and the silent, comforting rituals of the chapel without ever having to step out of their secluded, velvet-lined chamber. It is a stunning architectural gesture, a private, secret corridor carved through tons of unyielding stone, dedicated entirely to the peaceful, isolated contemplation of the divine, completely protected from the gaze of the outside world. If you were to press your ear closely to the opening of that narrow stone squint as the night deepens, you might catch the faint, incredibly resonant sound of the evening chant drifting through the dark. This rich, lingering echo was not merely a happy, accidental byproduct of the high-voltage ceilings, but the direct result of a deliberate, beautifully hidden acoustic technology. Master builders would frequently embed dozens of large, empty clay vessels, known universally as acoustic jars, directly into the high stone walls of the choir, laying them perfectly flat within the mortar with their wide, open mouths facing outward into the chapel. These hollow, smooth ceramic cavities acted as hidden, natural resonators perfectly tuned to the human voice. When the low, melodic, sweeping voices of the choir filled the room, the sound waves would slip into the empty clay jars and gently vibrate, catching the specific frequencies and naturally amplifying the chanting into a rich, heavenly, sweeping reverb. The very walls of the room were engineered to literally sing back to the inhabitants, transforming a cold, rigid stone cavern into a massive, highly tuned instrument of pure, enveloping acoustic peace. The silver moonlight that occasionally illuminated those echoing chants during the final hours of the day often passed through a highly distinct, deeply comforting form of early glazing known as walled glass or forest glass. Before the era of perfectly clear manufactured industrial panes, glassmakers working in small glowing kilns deep within the surrounding woodlands created their glass using local sand and potash derived from burned ferns and ancient beechwood. This incredibly organic, earthbound process left the finished glass with a magnificent, soft, pale green tint, heavily speckled with tiny trapped air bubbles and sweeping curved pontil marks from the iron-blowing rods. Looking through a heavy pane of walled glass did not offer a sharp, high-definition, stressful view of the courtyard below. Instead, it gently fractured and scattered the incoming light, casting a dappled, soft, underwater-like glow across the interior flagstones. It effectively brought the hushed, deeply shaded, mesmerizing atmosphere of a leafy, ancient forest directly into the rigid stone rooms, wrapping the interior in a permanent visual softness that instantly quieted the tired eyes and calmed the racing mind. Just as that forest glass gently softens the harsh light of the outside world, this quiet journey is naturally softening the edges of your own long day. The body continues to sink a little deeper into the mattress, completely surrendering its heavy weight to the dark. The breath is slow and even, settling effortlessly into a beautiful rhythm of total ease. You do not need to hold on to any of these specific details, simply let them wash over you like a soft green light. That exact same principle of natural cooling tranquility governed the deeply shadowed, completely subterranean spaces far beneath the kitchens, particularly the castle dairy. To safely preserve the staggering heavy wheels of rich, aged cheese and the deep, porous wooden crocks of sweet, freshly churned butter through the sweltering, oppressive heat of the summer months, architects relied entirely on the magnificent natural thermal properties of solid slate. The wide, heavy, continuous shelves lining the walls of the dairy were carved entirely from thick slabs of this dark, deeply layered metamorphic rock. slate possesses an extraordinary, almost magical ability to remain fundamentally, impossibly cold to the touch, greedily drawing the heat out of the surrounding air and the resting wooden vessels. Entering the dairy on a fiercely hot August afternoon was exactly like stepping across a threshold into an entirely different season. The air was perpetually crisp, perfectly still, and smelled faintly of sweet cream and cool, damp stone. It is a beautifully grounding realization that the simple, unyielding, permanent coldness of the earth itself was so intelligently harnessed to protect the most delicate, nourishing, and fragile provisions of the sprawling estate. Moving from the cool, dark slates of the subterranean dairy back up toward the warm, heavily timbered upper living quarters, a brilliant, vibrant secret often lay hidden just beneath the surface of the walls. While we modernly envision all castle interiors as vast, intimidating expanses of bare grey granite, the private rooms were frequently covered from floor to ceiling in breathtaking, brightly coloured, heavily detailed frescoes. To ensure these sweeping, intricate murals survived the inevitable, creeping dampness of the stone architecture, artists utilised an ancient, deeply organic, beautifully simple medium, egg tempera. They painstakingly ground precious raw earth pigments, rich yellow ochre, crushed green malachite, and deep, burnt sienna, and bound them together using nothing more than the simple, everyday yolk of an egg. This incredibly smooth, natural binder dried remarkably fast and created a paint of unbelievable, iron-like durability with a soft, luminous, incredibly matte finish. Centuries later, long after the heavy woolen tapestries had turned to dust and the wooden furniture had vanished, tiny fragments of these bright golden vines and painted stars still cling tenaciously to the plaster. They are quiet, enduring, beautiful whispers of colour, proving that true, lasting brilliance was often created using the humblest, most organic, everyday ingredients the estate had to offer. The profound, enduring desire to protect that fragile inner beauty and secure the absolute safety of the sleeping household necessitated the creation of the most satisfying, deeply reassuring piece of hardware in the entire fortress. Behind the massive iron-studded oak doors of the innermost chambers and the primary gatehouses lay the magnificent unseen drawbar channel. Rather than relying entirely on small, intricate brass locks that could eventually be picked or shattered by force, builders carved a deep, perfectly square, incredibly long tunnel straight into the solid masonry directly beside the wooden door frame. Inside this long, dark stone pocket rested a colossal, incredibly heavy beam of solid, seasoned oak. When the evening finally settled and the castle was officially sealed for the night, this massive beam was pulled smoothly and steadily out of the wall, sliding entirely across the immense width of the heavy doors and anchoring deeply into a corresponding perfect stone slot on the opposite side. The deep, heavy, incredibly resonating thud of the wooden drawbar dropping firmly into place is the absolute definitive acoustic signature of complete safety. It physically united the vulnerable wooden door with the unyielding ancient bedrock of the castle, transforming the entrance from a mere swinging barrier into an impenetrable solid wall of wood and stone. With the heavy oak drawbar firmly in place, sealing out the chaotic anxieties and endless demands of the broader world, the only sound that might gently reach the inner courtyard was a soft, rhythmic, incredibly soothing mechanical heartbeat. Situated just beyond the towering walls, often beautifully utilising the slow, steady overflow from the castle's protective moat or the man-made lake, stood the estate's dedicated watermill. The massive, moss-covered, heavy wooden wheel, pushed eternally forward by the gentle, endless, yielding weight of the flowing water, drove the heavy, rough, grinding millstones inside the timber frame. The sound it produced was an unbelievably relaxing, low-frequency rumble, a deep, rhythmic, sweeping churning constantly accompanied by the continuous delicate splash of the cold water tumbling over the wide wooden blades. This constant, slow-moving, gentle industrial lullaby was the defining acoustic background of the serene medieval landscape. It was a profoundly comforting auditory reassurance that even while the inhabitants surrendered entirely to sleep, the natural, effortless, unending power of the river was quietly, continuously working to grind the golden wheat, effortlessly providing the essential nourishment for the days yet to come. Let that deep, continuous, sweeping rhythm of the turning wooden wheel perfectly match the slow, steady beating of your own resting heart. Everything in this space is perfectly, beautifully balanced. The heavy mind can just drift on the gentle, moving current of the water, requiring no effort, completely trusting the heavy, peaceful, inevitable momentum of the long night. If you were to walk away from that rushing moonlit water and past the quiet, heavy, securely locked door of the castle apothecary, you might hear a much smaller, far more delicate rhythm echoing softly into the late evening. Preparing the specialized, calming medicinal draughts designed specifically to aid the sleep of the noble household, the apothecary utilized a heavy cast brass mortar and pestle. Unlike the rough, dull, grinding action of a heavy stone bowl, the cast brass produced a high, clear, highly musical ringing sound as the heavy pestle gently struck the sides of the metal, slowly crushing dried, earthy valerian root, sweet, dried chamomile flowers, and fragrant wild hops into a perfectly fine, pale powder. Cling, shh, cling, shh. The highly rhythmic, delicate metallic singing of the brass, perfectly combined with the incredibly rich, earthy, deeply relaxing scent of the crushed herbs filling the small dark room, was a hypnotic, beautiful sensory preparation for rest. It is a stunning testament to the profound care taken in this ancient quiet world, where the very act of meticulously preparing a sleeping remedy was, in itself, a profoundly soothing, highly musical meditation designed to calm the spirit long before the draught was ever consumed. The profound, delicate peace generated by those small, aromatic, medicinal rituals was entirely, permanently protected by a staggering architectural secret hidden deep within the very centre of the towering, intimidating curtain walls. When looking closely at the sheer, vertical, imposing face of a great castle, we see perfectly cut, completely smooth, rectangular blocks of pale limestone or dark granite, beautifully known as ashlar masonry. But this flawless, rigid, perfect exterior is actually a brilliant defensive illusion. The wall is not comprised of solid, identical blocks all the way through the 15-foot thickness. Master builders created two parallel, perfectly smooth outer skins of ashlar, and then completely filled the massive yawning gap between them with a chaotic, incredibly heavy mixture of raw fieldstone, broken river rocks, discarded flints, and thick, liquid lime mortar. This hidden, messy, profoundly heavy centre is known as the rubble core. While the outer, perfect stones provided a beautiful, rigid, intimidating shell, it was the deep, flexible, incredibly heavy rubble core that actually absorbed the massive, shocking impacts of a siege without shattering. It is a brilliant, profound architectural philosophy, presenting a perfectly smooth, beautiful, unyielding face to the outside world, while relying entirely on a deeply hidden, dense, incredibly flexible centre to gently absorb the heaviest blows and keep the towering structure standing tall against the test of time. High above that incredibly thick protective rubble core, the very top of the massive wall finally meets the infinite, breathtaking vastness of the night sky in a highly specific, universally recognised geometric pattern. The alternating solid stone teeth and empty gaps of the high battlements are known throughout history as the Merlins and Crenels. While they were built entirely for the highly practical, life-saving defence of the castle's archers, their visual, psychological effect in the deepest, most silent hours of the peaceful night is completely breathtaking. when a solitary, heavily cloaked guard walked the lead-lined parapet walk in the freezing, absolute silence of 3 in the morning. The heavy, imposing stone merlons essentially acted as massive, perfectly square picture frames for the cosmos. Looking out through the wide, open crenels, the overwhelming, chaotic, terrifying vastness of the glowing Milky Way was beautifully neatly segmented into manageable, perfect, entirely safe squares of glittering starlight. The intimidating, infinite scale of the universe was brought into a quiet, comforting geometric order by the sheer architecture of the heavy stone. It provided a deeply comforting, perfectly grounded perspective, a way to stand safely and securely within the absolute unchanging permanence of the earth, while looking quietly and peacefully out at the infinite, slowly turning silent mysteries of the heavens. As we reach the quietest, most expansive threshold of our journey, looking out over the vast sleeping estate one final time, we find the ultimate, most profound truth of these ancient stone giants. It is a beautiful secret not held within the heavy iron grates, nor in the towering, unyielding battlements, but deeply rooted in the soft, yielding earth at the very base of the walls. Long after a massive fortress has entirely fulfilled its defensive purpose, as the countless centuries slowly roll by and the sharp, intimidating edges of the masonry are gently, lovingly smoothed by the wind and the rain, a miraculous living legacy remains. Botanists and wandering ecologists have discovered that the quiet grounds immediately surrounding ancient castles are essentially living, breathing, botanical time capsules. Even when the great halls eventually lose their wooden roofs and the heavy stone walls slowly crumble back into the rolling hills, the incredibly specific, fragile, yet breathtakingly resilient flowers and medicinal herbs planted by the castle's inhabitants over 800 years ago continue to quietly thrive. The pale yellow wallflowers and tiny delicate ferns that root directly into the ancient lime mortar actually draw their vital nourishment from the dissolved stone itself, turning the ruined walls into a vertical blooming garden. Specific, highly localized strains of deeply fragrant damask roses, wild pinks, sweet fennel, and rare, calming chamomile that were originally carefully nurtured in the enclosed pleasure gardens simply refuse to fade away. They naturalize perfectly into the surrounding landscape, bravely outliving the powerful kings, the master architects, and the massive stone towers themselves. It is a breathtaking, deeply moving realization that the most permanent, enduring legacy of these colossal, intimidating military structures is not the heavy, rusting machinery of defense, but the delicate, fragrant, softly blooming flowers that return faithfully, spring after spring, century after undisturbed century. The heavy stone was built to resist the changing world, but it is the soft, yielding, gentle plants that truly conquered time. They stand as a quiet, eternal promise that delicate beauty and gentle, nurturing care will always gracefully outlast the rigid walls of history. And so, our long, slow wandering through these ancient corridors naturally comes to an end. We have walked softly through the warm, firelit halls, rested entirely in the quiet, velvet-draped chambers, and stood peacefully beneath the vast, starry skies of a world that profoundly understood the deep value of absolute stillness. You do not need to try to remember the intricate woven details of the tapestries, the heavy, reassuring mechanics of the oak doors, or the quiet, enduring secrets of the pale stone. You do not need to hold on to a single word or image. Let them all simply wash away, just like the soft, rhythmic evening rains gently smoothing the ancient limestone. What matters now is only the deep, enduring peace those silent stones represented, a profound, settling peace that is now entirely yours to keep. The long journey is completely finished. The heavy wooden shutters have been drawn tightly and securely against the night. The massive iron drawbar has fallen safely and heavily into its resting place. The bright, chaotic embers in the great hearth are now softly covered in a thick, insulating, protective layer of grey ash, glowing warmly and quietly in the absolute dark, asking absolutely nothing of the world above. You too can now completely surrender your own bright energy to the quiet. Feel the gentle, reassuring, undeniable weight of your own body sinking effortlessly into the total softness beneath you. There are no more heavy walls to climb, no more winding, shadowed pathways to navigate. Your breathing is remarkably slow, wonderfully steady, and deeply comforting. Each breath is a quiet, rhythmic echo of the wind moving softly through the high, empty towers, gently carrying away the last, lingering, heavy remnants of the waking day. The tight muscles in your shoulders simply release and fall. Your hands are perfectly, effortlessly still. The mind has become an expansive, calm, perfectly reflecting lake, entirely undisturbed by the distant, rushing winds of tomorrow. Everything is completely safe. Everything is entirely settled. The vast world outside will continue its endless, rapidly turning rhythms. But inside this space, right now, there is only the profound, beautiful, simple comfort of deep rest. Let the heavy, comforting velvet of the long night wrap completely and securely around you. Let the absolute silence hold you. Drift softly and naturally into the vast, welcoming darkness, deeply trusting the quiet, enduring strength of the earth below and the gentle, infinite peace of the sky above. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.